Thought I was gone, not resting, not watching, gone. You closed the chapter with relief. You crossed my name out like a mistake. You spoke about me in the past tense, as if silence meant surrender, as if absence meant defeat. You buried my name before you buried my body. You celebrated the quiet. You mistook stillness for weakness. But listen to me. I didn't vanish. I waited. There is a difference you never learned to recognize. I watched the world move on without me. I watched you grow comfortable. I watched you mistake peace for permanence. And while you slept, while you laughed, while you convinced yourselves the threat was gone, I was still breathing. I was still thinking. I was still becoming. You see, history doesn't forget. It reloads. You thought the fire was out because the smoke disappeared. You didn't realize the ashes were still hot. You didn't realize pressure was building underneath the silence. Storms don't announce themselves. They wait beyond the horizon. They let the sky relax. And then they return. I know what you told yourselves. I know the stories you repeated until you believed them. He's finished. He couldn't handle it. He broke. He faded. Say it again, say it louder, because every word you used to erase me carved something sharper inside my spine. You see, disappearance is the most misunderstood form of power. The loud ones burn out. The reactive ones collapse. The desperate ones beg for relevance. But the quiet ones, the ones who step back without explanation, they are not retreating. They are recalculating. I became a rumor you dismissed, a memory you mocked, a warning you ignored, and that was your mistake. Because when a man has nothing left to prove, nothing left to protect, nothing left to explain, he becomes dangerous in ways you cannot measure. You thought my silence was fear. No, it was respect for the process. I needed distance from the noise, from the opinions, from the voices that only knew how to doubt. I needed the world to stop watching me so I could see myself clearly. You see, when everyone is staring, you perform. When no one is watching, you evolve, and I chose evolution. I stepped into the shadows not because I was weak, but because I was unfinished. You never notice the moment a blade is sharpened. You only notice when it cuts. I let you believe I was done. I let you underestimate what survives in isolation. Because there is a version of strength that only appears when applause disappears. Tell me, who are you without witnesses? I learned the answer the hard way. When I vanished, I lost everything you thought defined me. Titles, validation, belonging, and in that emptiness something terrifying happened. I stopped needing permission. No one clapped for my discipline. No one comforted my doubt. No one guided my steps. Good. Because what grows without praise does not collapse under criticism. I faced myself without filters, without excuses, without lies. I met the parts of me you never saw, the parts that don't smile, the parts that don't explain, the parts that don't forgive easily. And I didn't run. I listened. I listened to the rage I was told to suppress. I listened to the hunger I was told to tame. I listened to the voice inside me that said, "You were never meant to be small." That voice didn't scream. It waited, just like I did. You see, being forgotten does something powerful to a person. It removes the need to impress. Removes the need to fit in. It removes the illusion of safety. When the world turns its back on you, you either disappear for real or you are reborn without limits. And I chose rebirth. I learned that silence isn't empty. It's heavy. It's dense. It's full of thoughts sharp enough to cut through fear. Every day you didn't see me, I was stripping myself down to what mattered. Not hope, not approval, not belonging, resolve. You don't understand what happens when a man stops asking to be accepted. When he stops waiting to be chosen. When he stops trying to be understood. He becomes precise. I stopped explaining myself to people who never listened. I stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable. I stopped apologizing for the weight of my presence. You wanted me quiet, you got it. And in that quiet, I became fluent in patience. Patience taught me timing. Timing taught me control. Control taught me power. I learned when to speak, when to move, when to let the world expose itself without interference. Because people reveal everything when they think you're gone. Their intentions, their fears, their weaknesses. I watched you show your true faces when you thought there were no consequences. I remember, I always remember, but don't mistake memory for revenge. I didn't come back angry. Anger is loud, anger is sloppy, anger burns fast and dies young. I came back clear. Clarity is cold, clarity is patient. clarity does miss. You thought I disappeared because I couldn't handle the pressure. No, I disappeared because pressure creates diamonds, and I wasn't done forming. I needed the weight, I needed the darkness, I needed the isolation to finish the work. You see, when you remove distractions, you hear your purpose breathing, and mine never stopped. Even when my name faded from your conversations, even when my absence became a joke, even when you assumed I'd never return, I was still here, listening, preparing, becoming. You should have been afraid of my silence, but you celebrated it. That's how I know you never understood me. I don't rise when I'm seen. I rise when I'm underestimated. I don't move when I'm challenged. I move when I'm dismissed. You gave me space. You gave me time. You gave me the greatest weapon of all. Freedom. Freedom from your expectations. Freedom from your limits. Freedom from the version of me you could control. And now I'm back again, not to explain, not to apologize. Not to ask for space. I'm back because what was unfinished is now complete. I'm back because the silence has done its work. I'm back because storms don't ask permission to return. They arrive slow, heavy, unstoppable. You can feel it now, can't you? That shift in the air, that unease you can't explain. Good, that's not fear, that's recognition. You're remembering who I was and realizing I'm no longer that person. You thought my absence was the end of my story. It was the beginning of yours, and this time. I won't disappear, I won't fade, I won't wait forever. I waited long enough, I'm back again, and the quiet you enjoyed is over. When loyalty died first, they didn't leave all at once. That's the part people don't understand. Betrayal isn't loud in the beginning, it whispers, it smiles, it pretends. They smiled while sharpening the knife. Not enemies, never enemies, friends, family, familiar voices that once said my name with warmth. That's how it always starts. No warning, no announcement. Just a slow change in the air. The pauses grew longer, the replies grew colder, the support became conditional. And suddenly I was alone in rooms that used to feel full. I remember the first time I felt it. That moment when you realize the ground beneath you is no longer solid. When laughter sounds rehearsed. When loyalty feels borrowed. They didn't push me away. They stepped back. One step at a time, just enough to leave me standing alone without witnesses. They said nothing was wrong. They said I was imagining things. They said I was overthinking. But intuition never lies. It feels the shift before the mind accepts it. I trusted them. That was my mistake. Trust is always the first casualty, because trust requires courage. And most people don't have enough of it when things get uncomfortable. They wanted my strength when it served them, my presence when it benefited them, my loyalty when it cost me nothing. But the moment my weight became heavy, the moment my struggle required effort, the moment standing beside me demanded sacrifice, they disappeared. Not dramatically, not cruelly, quietly, like wolves removing the weakest from the pack. No fight, no explanation, just distance. You ever notice how people do betray you when you're winning? They betray you when you're bleeding, when your shine dims, when your confidence cracks, when you're no longer useful as proof of their good choices. That's when loyalty dies. Not because you changed, but because they couldn't handle the reflection. I didn't ask for much. I didn't ask for perfection. I didn't ask for saving. I asked for presence, and even that was too much. They told me to be patient. They told me to be understanding. They told me to lower my expectations. Funny how those words only appear when people are preparing to abandon you. They chose comfort. I chose truth. Truth doesn't feel good at first. It cuts. It isolates. It strips away illusions you didn't even know you were wearing. But comfort is a slow poison. Comfort tells you to stay silent, to accept disrespect, to swallow disappointment and call it maturity. I refused, and for that I paid the price. I became inconvenient. I became too intense, too much, too different. Those labels appear right before rejection, because it's easier to blame your nature than to admit their weakness. They didn't hate me. They just didn't want to stand beside someone who reminded them of everything they were avoiding. So they left, one by one. I watched the circles shrink. I watched promises dissolve. I watched loyalty turn into memory. And with every step they took away from me, something inside me hardened, not bitter, aware. I stopped expecting people to be what they promised. I stopped believing words without action. I stopped confusing familiarity with loyalty. You learn fast when abandonment becomes routine. I stood alone long before I walked alone. That's the part no one sees. The internal loneliness that arrives before the physical one. Being surrounded by people who don't really see you, who don't really choose you, who stay only as long as it's easy. That kind of loneliness changes you. It sharpens your perception. I noticed patterns. Who vanished when I struggled, who only showed up when I succeeded, who needed me but never needed to protect me. I took notes, silently. I learned that most people don't leave because you're weak. They leave because your struggle forces them to confront their own. And they would rather walk away than look at themselves honestly. So they rewrite the story. They call you difficult. They call you unstable. They call you lost. Anything to avoid the truth that loyalty requires spine. And most people bend before they break. I don't blame them, not anymore. Blame keeps you stuck. Understanding sets you free. I understand now that people love you in phases. When you're rising, when you're entertaining, when you're useful, but when you're rebuilding, that's sacred ground, and very few are allowed to stand there. They couldn't handle my questions, my silence, my refusal to pretend everything was fine, so they chose distance, and I let them. That was the first time I chose myself. No arguments, no chasing, no begging for clarity. I watched who stayed, and the list was short, painfully short, but honest. I learned something brutal in that season. People don't abandon you all at once. They abandon you emotionally first. They stop listening. They stop defending you. They stop including you. By the time they physically leave, they've been gone for a long time, and I felt every stage of it. The confusion, the self-doubt, the nights replaying conversations in my head. What did I do wrong? Was I too much? Should I have stayed quiet? Questions that eat at your confidence. Questions that slowly rust the crown before it ever breaks. That rust is dangerous because it makes you forget who you are. It convinces you that loyalty is a favor, that respect is optional, that silence is survival. I almost believed it, almost, but pain has a way of clarifying things. Pain forces honesty, and honesty showed me something undeniable. I wasn't abandoned because I lacked value. I was abandoned because I outgrew the space they wanted to keep me in. They needed me smaller, quieter, easier to manage, and I was becoming none of those things, so they left. Or maybe I finally stopped shrinking. Either way, the result was the same. Isolation, cold, unforgiving, necessary. Isolation doesn't weaken you if you survive it consciously. It strips away dependency. It forces you to hear your own voice without interference. In isolation, there are no distractions. No one to blame, no one to impress, no one to lean on, just you. And that's terrifying, but also powerful. Because when you survive alone, you stop fearing abandonment. You stop tolerating disrespect. You stop confusing presence with loyalty. I learned to sit with myself, with the anger, with the disappointment, with the grief of losing people who were never really mine to begin with. I mourned the versions of them I believed in, not the truth. And once I accepted that, the pain changed shape. It became fuel. I no longer looked for validation in faces that turned away. I no longer waited for messages that never came. I stopped knocking on doors that were clearly locked from the inside. That's when strength began to form. Not loud strength, not aggressive strength, quiet strength. The kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that grows roots. I learned to rely on discipline instead of motivation, on consistency instead of support, on self-respect instead of approval. And something else happened. I stopped explaining myself. People who want to understand you will ask questions. People who want to leave will look for excuses. I stopped helping them find those excuses. Let them go confused. Let them go comfortable. Let them go believing their version of the story. I didn't need to correct them because the truth doesn't chase. It waits. I was wounded. Yes, but wounds teach you where not to bleed again. I didn't close my heart. I armored it. There's a difference. I still believe in loyalty. But now I understand its price. Loyalty isn't common. It's earned. It's tested. It survives pressure. Anyone can stand with you in daylight. Few remain when the lights go out. And those few, those are the ones worth protecting. Everyone else, they were lessons. I don't hate them. Hate gives too much energy. I don't miss them. Missing implies loss. I simply remember. And memory keeps me sharp. I stand here now not bitter, but awake. I know what it costs to trust. I know what it feels like to be left behind. I know what it means to rebuild without witnesses. And I wouldn't trade that knowledge for comfort, because comfort weakens, truth hardens. They chose comfort, I chose truth. And that choice is what carried me forward, alone but unbreakable. Because when loyalty dies first, what's left is strength that no one can take from you. This is where I died, not the dramatic kind, not the kind people notice. No blood, no. Just a quiet collapse inside my chest. I remember the moment clarity left me, not all at once, piece by piece, like a mirror cracking, not shattering. A fracture spreading slowly across my reflection until I no longer recognized who was staring back. I kept asking questions no one answered. I kept knocking on doors that stayed silent. I kept believing effort would be enough. It was. The world didn't push me down. It watched me fall and looked away. That's when something inside me went numb. I stopped praying, I stopped hoping, not because I stopped believing, but because belief felt like a language the universe no longer spoke. Every word I whispered returned empty. Every plea dissolved before it reached meaning. Hope became heavy. Faith became exhausting, and I was tired. I didn't want the world anymore. Not the noise, not the expectations, not the endless pretending that everything would be fine. I wanted quiet, but silence wasn't peaceful. Silence was loud. It screamed in my ears. It pressed against my thoughts. It suffocated every distraction I used to survive. Silence is brutal when you have nowhere left to hide. I sat with myself in that darkness. No excuses, no audience, no escape, just the truth. And the truth didn't comfort me, it dismantled me. I realized I didn't know who I was without approval, without purpose assigned by others, without the roles I played to be accepted. Those identities fell apart one by one. The strong one, the reliable one, the hopeful one, dead. I watched them fade without ceremony. This wasn't pain. Pain implies something can heal. This was erasure, a slow deletion of everything familiar. I woke up empty. I went to sleep hollow. I moved through days like a shadow of intention, breathing without living, existing without direction. I stopped dreaming. Dreams require belief in tomorrow. I didn't have that anymore. Every thought felt heavier than the last. Every step felt unnecessary. I questioned everything. Why keep trying? Why keep standing? Why keep caring? The answers never came, and when answers disappear, darkness steps in. Not violently, patiently. Darkness doesn't rush you. It waits until resistance is gone. It sits beside you and tells you nothing matters anymore. And for a while, I listened. I surrendered. I let go of who I thought I was supposed to be. I let go of expectations. I let go of hope. I let go of myself. That's the moment people don't talk about. The moment after heartbreak, after betrayal, after isolation. The moment when the fight leaves your body, when you stop arguing with reality, when you stop trying to win. That's where I was, collapsed inward. A heartbeat fading into noise. I could hear it sometimes, faint, irregular, like it was deciding whether to continue. I looked at the world and felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no desire, just distance. I watched life move around me like I wasn't part of it anymore. People laughed, people planned, people cared. I observed, detached, unmoved. That scared me more than pain ever did, because pain means you're still connected. Numbness means you've crossed a line. I thought about disappearing for real, not running away, just stopping. I didn't want the world anymore. And for the first time, the world didn't seem to want me either. That mutual rejection is dangerous. It creates a void. And voids don't stay empty. Something always fills them. Darkness filled mine. It whispered truths I wasn't ready to hear, that no one was coming, that no one owed me anything, that survival was my responsibility alone. At first, those thoughts crushed me. Then they freed me, but before freedom comes destruction, and destruction doesn't ask for permission. I lost my identity completely. The version of me that needed validation died. The version of me that trusted easily died. The version of me that believed effort guaranteed fairness died. I mourned them, quietly. No one noticed, no one asked, and that confirmed everything. This was my breaking point, not explosive, implosive. I turned inward until there was nothing left to turn. I questioned my worth, my direction, my reason for continuing. I stripped myself down to the core. And what remained wasn't pretty. It was raw. It was wounded. It was honest. I saw my flaws without excuses. My weaknesses without denial. My fears without filters. And I hated what I saw, but I didn't look away. That's important. Most people numb themselves before this stage. They distract, they escape, they avoid. I stayed. I sat in the ruins of who I used to be and let the silence crush me, because I needed to know if anything real was left. I remember staring at nothing and realizing something terrifying. If everything was gone, then nothing could be taken from me again. That thought didn't comfort me at first. It chilled me, because it meant I had nothing to lose, and people with nothing to lose either disappear or become dangerous. I didn't choose immediately. I hovered between existence and oblivion, between surrender and rebirth. Days blurred together, time lost meaning, emotion dulled. But somewhere in that emptiness, something resisted, not loudly, not heroically, just a refusal to completely vanish. A quiet defiance buried beneath exhaustion. A pulse, weak. But present, the heartbeat didn't stop. It adapted, it slowed, it hardened, and I realized something crucial. I wasn't breaking anymore. I had already broken. This was the aftermath, the silence after collapse, the stillness after the storm. And in that stillness I could choose, stay erased, or rebuild from nothing. No borrowed identities, no false hope, no illusions, just truth, brutal truth, that this world is indifferent, that loyalty is rare. That survival requires strength no one teaches you. I accepted it, fully. And acceptance changed the texture of the darkness. It stopped suffocating me. It started shaping me. I stopped fighting the void and began listening to it. It told me what mattered, not approval, not belonging, not being liked. Only resilience, only discipline, only will. This wasn't a comeback, not yet. This was the grave, the place where the old me stayed buried, where excuses died. Where entitlement died. Where softness died. I didn't crawl out immediately. I stayed long enough to make sure nothing from my past followed me. I burned the need to be understood. I buried the need to be chosen. I erased the desire to be saved. When I finally stood up inside myself, I was empty. And that emptiness was powerful, because empty things can be rebuilt in any shape they choose. This is where I died. And death taught me something life never did, that nothing changes until you're willing to lose everything. Including who you thought you were, I lost it all here. And that loss became the foundation. The world didn't hear me break. Good. This death wasn't meant to be witnessed, because what comes after death doesn't ask for permission to exist. And when I rise, not yet, but soon, I won't rise as the man who broke. I'll rise as the one who survived erasure and learned to breathe in the dark. This was the end, and ends are quiet. The beginning will not be. While you slept, I changed. While you slept, I changed. Not suddenly, not loudly, quietly, deliberately. I withdrew from the world the way a blade withdraws from fire, not to cool, but to harden. You thought my silence meant recovery. You thought it meant weakness. You thought it meant I was hiding. No, silence didn't heal me. It sharpened me. I stepped back from the noise because noise blurs judgment. I stepped away from voices because voices dilute instinct. I chose quiet because quiet reveals truth. And in that quiet, I watched. I watched who moved with confidence when no one questioned them. I watched who collapsed when attention faded. I watched who thrived on chaos and who crumbled without applause. I watched patterns form. I watched how power actually works, not how it's advertised, but how it's enforced. I watched people smile in public and calculate in private. I watched loyalty bend under pressure. I watched principles evaporate when comfort was threatened. I watched everything. Because observation is the first form of dominance. While you reacted, I recorded. While you argued, I analyzed. While you explained yourself, I memorized your habits. I didn't interrupt. I didn't announce growth. I didn't demand recognition. I studied. While you celebrated, I studied. Celebration makes you careless. Silence makes you precise. I learned patience from hunger. Hunger teaches discipline faster than success ever will. When you want something badly enough, you stop wasting energy. I stopped chasing approval. I stopped performing for acceptance. I stopped reacting to provocation. Reaction gives control away, so I took mine back. I learned to sit still while my instincts screamed. I learned to breathe while my mind demanded movement. I learned restraint, not because I lacked power, but because I was accumulating it. You don't see preparation, that's the point. The predator doesn't announce itself, it learns the terrain. I learned the terrain. I learned where people felt safe, where they felt superior, where they grew careless. I learned what words disarmed them, what silence unsettled them, what presence shifted rooms. I watched how fear spreads. I watched how confidence infects. I didn't rush. Rushing is what amateurs do. I slowed everything down. I controlled my breath, my expressions, my timing. I became unreadable. And unreadable men terrify predictable systems. I stopped apologizing for distance. I stopped explaining absence. I stopped clarifying intentions. No apologies, no explanations, because explanations invite judgment, and judgment invites interference. I didn't need permission to evolve, I needed solitude. I trained myself to endure boredom, to sit with discomfort, to survive without validation. That's when pain transformed. Pain stopped being an enemy, it became instruction. Every sleepless night taught me endurance. Every unanswered message taught me independence. Every ignored effort taught me self-reliance. Pain became discipline. Discipline became structure. Structure became power. I set rules for myself when no one was watching. I held standards when no one enforced them. I demanded excellence without reward. That's how monsters are forged, not in chaos, in control. I learned to move when it mattered, and remain still when it didn't. Stillness is not passivity, it's pressure withheld. I watched opportunities pass by that once would have tempted me, and I let them go, because I learned the value of timing. You don't strike when you're emotional, you strike when you're inevitable. I watched my emotions like an external force. I observed anger rise, I observed fear whisper, and I denied them command. Emotion became data, not direction. That's when I changed, not on the surface. At the core, my voice slowed, my reactions sharpened. My presence gained weight. People began to feel something different, even if they couldn't name it. Silence does that. Silence disturbs patterns. I watched how people filled quiet with lies, with excuses, with unnecessary noise. I let them, because noise reveals insecurity. I learned when to speak less than necessary. I learned when to say nothing at all. Nothing disarms faster than nothing. You expect defense, you expect reaction, you expect resistance, you don't expect calm. Calm unsettles people who rely on chaos. I became calm, cold, measured. Not because I felt nothing, but because I felt everything and chose what deserved expression. I didn't lose empathy, I mastered it. I learned to see motivations behind behavior. Fear behind arrogance, weakness behind cruelty. And once you see it clearly, you stop being affected by it. I watched the world repeat itself. Same mistakes, same cycles, different faces. I watched how quickly people forget pain once it's no longer theirs. I watched promises dissolve the moment accountability appeared. And I adjusted. I adjusted my expectations, my boundaries, my access. Access became earned, presence became selective, energy became sacred. I stopped giving everything to everyone. I conserved. A blade doesn't swing constantly, it waits. I learned how to wait. I learned how to endure the urge to prove myself, to correct misunderstandings. To defend my name, I let my name go quiet. Names grow powerful in silence. I became comfortable being underestimated. Underestimation is leverage. I watched people relax around me. I watched them speak freely. I watched them reveal their assumptions, and I memorized them. I learned patience from hunger. Hunger sharpens focus. It teaches you what matters and what doesn't survive necessity. I stripped my life down to essentials. Discipline, awareness, control, everything else was excess. I didn't seek revenge. Revenge is reactive. I sought positioning. Positioning is permanent. I positioned myself above impulse, above noise, above the need to be liked. And from there, the world looked different, smaller, predictable. I saw how systems reward compliance, how they punish independence, how they fear self-contained strength. So I became self-contained. I didn't ask for guidance. I didn't seek validation. I didn't announce transformation. I lived it day after day. Quietly, I watched my habits change, my thoughts harden, my tolerance narrow. I no longer tolerated weakness in myself. Not cruelty, weakness. Weakness is allowing emotion to rule decision. Weakness is needing approval to move forward. Weakness is reacting instead of responding. I eliminated it, slowly, methodically. No applause, no witnesses, just progress. I stopped explaining my absence. Absence is a statement. Those who understand don't ask. Those who ask don't matter. I watched who noticed the change and who remained oblivious. Awareness separated allies from obstacles. I kept notes, not written, internal, patterns etched into instinct. I learned how people behave when they think they're safe. That knowledge is dangerous, because when the time comes, you already know where to stand. Silence prepared me. It didn't soften me. It didn't save me. It weaponized me. I emerged not louder but heavier, not aggressive but deliberate. I didn't become cruel. I became precise. Precision is misunderstood. People call it cold because it lacks excess emotion. Precision is respect for outcome. I respect outcomes. I learned to detach from immediate satisfaction for long-term dominance. That's discipline. That's patience. That's power. While you slept, I changed. While you spoke, I listened. While you assumed, I calculated. While you relaxed, I refined. I don't move on impulse anymore. I move on certainty. And certainty comes from preparation. The monster you fear isn't born in rage. It's forged in restraint. I'm not loud because loud draws attention. I'm not reckless because reckless reveals weakness. I am controlled. And control is terrifying to those who live on reaction. I didn't need darkness to hide. I used it to sharpen my vision. I didn't curse silence. I mastered it because silence carries weight. And now when I speak, when I move, when I act, it matters. This wasn't recovery. This was construction. Blade forged in darkness. Predator learning the terrain. While you slept, I became inevitable. I was never meant to be like you. I see it now. Not as a wound, not as a question, as clarity. The noise finally faded. The ache finally settled. And in that stillness, truth stepped forward without permission. I was never meant to be like you. That realization didn't arrive with anger. It arrived with relief. A calm so sharp it cut through every doubt I'd been carrying. I had spent so long trying to fit into spaces that shrank me. So long adjusting my edges to match rooms that couldn't hold my weight. So long confusing acceptance with survival. I see it now. I was trying to belong where I was meant to rule, not over people, over myself. I mistook conformity for safety, approval for worth, familiarity for loyalty. And every time I did, something inside me resisted. That resistance wasn't arrogance, it was instinct. I wasn't broken, I was misaligned. They needed me small, smaller thoughts, smaller ambition, smaller presence. I needed me free, free from permission. Free from consensus, free from the unspoken rules designed to keep power predictable. I finally understood the dynamic. The world doesn't reward those who know themselves. It rewards those who can be managed. So when you don't fit, when you don't submit, when you don't dilute yourself to be digestible, they call you difficult. They call you intense. They call you dangerous. Good. Dangerous is just power they can't control. I stopped asking why they left, why they misunderstood me. Why loyalty came with conditions. Why is a trap? Why keeps you looking backward? I started deciding what I tolerate, deciding what I protect, deciding who gets access to my energy. Decision is authority, and authority begins internally. I stopped negotiating my nature. I stopped explaining my ambition. I stopped seeking approval from people who benefited from my doubt. Approval is a leash, and I removed it. The moment I did, something extraordinary happened. The chains fell. Not violently, not dramatically. They fell without resistance because they were never locked. I had been holding them in place. Fear of rejection, fear of isolation, fear of standing alone with my truth. Those fears kept me compliant. But once I accepted who I am, once I stopped wishing to be understood, once I chose self-alignment over validation, the weight disappeared. I stood taller without effort. calmer without pretending. I felt the crown finally fit, not a crown of ego. A crown of responsibility. Responsibility for my choices, my direction, my standards. I understood power dynamics clearly for the first time. Power doesn't shout, it doesn't beg, it doesn't explain itself to those who refuse to listen. Power moves with certainty, and certainty comes from self-acceptance. I no longer needed to be liked, I needed to be effective. I no longer needed consensus, I needed conviction. I look back at the moments that once broke me and saw them for what they were. Tests. Every rejection refined me. Every betrayal clarified my values. Every moment of isolation strengthened my spine. Nothing was wasted. Pain wasn't punishment, it was positioning. I stopped romanticizing suffering. Suffering without purpose is decay, but suffering with intention, that's transformation. I accepted my differences without apology. My intensity, my discipline, my refusal to settle. Those traits didn't isolate me. They filtered the world. They separated noise from signal. I didn't become cold, I became selective. I didn't become ruthless, I became clear. There's a difference. I understood that most people don't reject you because you're wrong. They reject you because your existence threatens their comfort, because your discipline exposes their excuses, because your clarity reflects their confusion. That's not your burden to carry. I released it. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped lowering my standards to be accepted. I stopped waiting for permission to take up space. The moment I accepted that I wasn't meant to be like them, everything aligned. My decisions became faster. My boundaries became firmer. My presence became heavier, not louder, heavier. People felt it before they understood it. That's what happens when identity solidifies. There's no desperation, no seeking, no proving. Just movement, purposeful, unapologetic. I stopped trying to be inspirational. I focused on being inevitable. I didn't need to convince anyone. I needed to commit. I committed to my values even when they cost me comfort. I committed to growth even when it required solitude. I committed to discipline even when no one noticed. That commitment changed the way the world responded to me, not immediately, but permanently. Because the world adapts to certainty, I became certain. Certain of who I am, certain of what I tolerate, certain of where I'm going. Uncertainty invites interference. Certainty demands respect. I didn't ask for it, I embodied it. I accepted that leadership is lonely, that independence attracts resistance. That strength invites projection, and I stopped caring. Care is currency, and I don't spend it on opinions that don't shape outcomes. I finally understood this truth. Not everyone is meant to understand you. Some are meant to witness you. From a distance, I accepted that my path wouldn't be crowded, that my pace wouldn't be comfortable for everyone, that my standards would intimidate the unprepared. So be it. I was trying to belong where I was meant to rule. Rule my habits, rule my impulses, rule my direction. I took control, and control changed everything. I didn't need to dominate anyone else. I needed to dominate my hesitation, my doubt, my need for approval. Once those were conquered, the rest became irrelevant. I felt calm in my decisions, dangerous calm, the kind that doesn't argue, the kind that doesn't flinch, the kind that doesn't retreat. I stopped asking why the world was the way it was. I started deciding how I would move within it. I stopped hoping for fairness. I built leverage. I stopped chasing peace. I created order. And in that order, I found freedom. This wasn't a rebellion. It was alignment. I didn't change who I was. I accepted it fully. And acceptance unlocked power I had been suppressing. No more shrinking. No more waiting. No more negotiating with fear. I stand here now with clarity that doesn't waver. I know who I am, I know what I want, I know what I will not tolerate, and that knowledge is unshakable. They needed me small, I needed me free. I chose freedom, and freedom chose me back. The crown fits, the chains are gone. I stopped asking why, I started deciding. And every decision from this point forward will be made from strength. Not pain, not fear, strength. This is the moment it all clicked. This is where identity solidified. This is where the path became clear. And from here, there is no going back. I rebuilt myself without mercy. I didn't evolve. I demolished. There is a difference. Evolution is slow, gentle, forgiving. I didn't have time for gentle. I had rot to burn out of my system, so I burned it. I killed the version of me that begged. One that waited, the one that hoped. The one that tried to be understood instead of being respected. I didn't wound him, I erased him. No ceremony, no regret. Because mercy toward weakness is cruelty toward potential. I looked at myself with ruthless honesty for the first time, not the reflection I wanted. The reflection that existed. And I asked a single question. What part of me is costing me power? Then I answered. One flaw at a time. One excuse at a time. I didn't negotiate. I removed. Weakness didn't leave me. I removed it, piece by piece, habit by habit, thought by thought. I became my own executioner and my own architect. I tore down the old structure completely. Every belief that made me hesitate, every attachment that softened my edge, every comfort that slowed my pace. Gone. People talk about rebuilding like it's inspirational. They lie. Rebuilding is violent. It is fire ripping through identity. It is silence screaming at you in the dark. It is discipline when motivation is dead. I rebuilt myself without mercy, because mercy had almost destroyed me. I stopped asking if something felt good. I asked if it made me stronger. If it didn't, it was cut. No explanation, no nostalgia. I didn't miss my old self. I outgrew him. I imposed order on chaos, woke up when it hurt, worked when it was empty, pushed when my mind begged me to stop. I didn't listen. I commanded. I became my own law. No excuses allowed. No self-pity tolerated. No weakness protected. I audited my thoughts like an enemy territory. Every doubt was interrogated. Every fear was exposed. Every lie was dismantled. I stopped romanticizing struggle. I weaponized it. Pain became instruction. Failure became data. Isolation became focus. I didn't need motivation. I had obsession. Obsession doesn't wait for mood. It moves regardless. I rewrote myself at the core like rewriting DNA. Eliminating defects, amplifying strength. Hard-coding discipline. I trained my mind to obey, to move when told, to endure without complaint, to remain silent when screaming would be easier. Silence builds authority. I learned to suffer privately. No witnesses, no applause, just progress. While others talked about balance, I chose dominance. Balance is for those afraid of extremes. I went all in. I sacrificed comfort. I sacrificed ease. I sacrificed the illusion of normal. Normal is a cage. I broke it. I became unrecognizable. Not to them, to myself. The old reactions disappeared. The old triggers lost their grip. The old insecurities stopped speaking. They had no authority here anymore. I stopped explaining my process. Explanation invites opinion. Opinion invites interference. I worked in silence, built in silence, changed in silence. And when the results began to show, I said nothing. Let them wonder. Wonder is power. I rebuilt like a city after fire. Not the same layout, not the same streets. Stronger foundations. Higher walls, clearer systems, no weak points. I designed myself for pressure, for chaos, for endurance. I stopped trying to be liked. I optimized to be effective. I stopped asking for understanding. I demanded results, and results answered. My posture changed. My voice slowed. My presence sharpened. People felt it before they saw it, because power announces itself without words. I didn't become cruel. I became precise. There's a difference. Cruelty is careless. Precision is intentional. I cut what didn't serve. I kept what did. No sentiment, no apology. I killed the version of me that begged, the one that needed reassurance, the one that waited for permission, the one that softened truth to be accepted. He is gone. In his place stands something colder, clearer, more dangerous. I don't chase anymore. I position. I don't react. I calculate. I don't fear loss. I design outcomes. I became disciplined beyond emotion. Emotion is a signal. Not a command. I feel it. Then I decide, always decide. I stopped identifying with pain. Pain is temporary, structure is permanent. I built structure daily, relentlessly, without drama. No one applauded. Good applause weakens resolve. I didn't want witnesses, I wanted results. I became obsessed with mastery, of self, of impulse, of time. Time is the only currency, and I stopped wasting it. Every hour accounted for, every action intentional, every excuse eliminated. I didn't drift into this version, I forced it into existence. Through repetition, through sacrifice, through refusal to quit when quitting would have been easy. I told myself the truth even when it hurt, especially when it hurt. That honesty changed me. Lies comfort, truth sharpens. I chose sharp. I became my own standard, my own competition, my own threat. I didn't wait to be saved. I rebuilt myself without mercy. And mercy never made anyone great. I am not for everyone. I am not trying to be. I don't belong to crowds. I move alone. Because solitude accelerates evolution. I stopped needing approval. Approval is a drug I detoxed. I stopped needing validation. Validation weakens resolve. I starved it out. I stopped explaining my ambition. Ambition doesn't need permission. It needs discipline. I have discipline. I train my body to follow, my mind to obey, my emotions to stand down. I became calm under pressure, still under chaos, focused under fire. Because I built myself for this. I built myself when no one was watching. That's where real power is made. I didn't ask if it was fair. Fairness is irrelevant. I asked if it made me stronger, and if it did, I endured it. I became ruthless with myself, not abusive, honest. No shortcuts, no excuses, no victim stories. Victimhood is weakness wearing a mask. I ripped it off. I don't complain, I adjust. I don't blame, I improve. I don't break, I adapt. I became my own law. And I enforce it daily. With consistency, with discipline, with obsession. I don't need motivation. I built systems. Systems don't fail when emotions do. I'm no longer recognizable to the world that doubted me, and I don't care. Recognition is for the insecure. I know what I am. I know what I built. I know what I survived. And I know what I'm capable of now. I rebuilt myself without mercy from the ground up. From the inside out, every weakness removed, every strength amplified. Every limit challenged, every fear confronted. This isn't arrogance. This is ownership. I own my flaws. I own my power. I own my direction. I am no longer becoming. I am. And I am relentless, unapologetic, unstoppable. The old me is dead. The new me doesn't ask. He decides. He executes. He endures. And he wins. Not because he was gifted, but because he was rebuilt without mercy. Now they whisper in my name. They don't laugh anymore. That's the first thing I noticed. Not applause. Not praise, not congratulations. Silence, a careful kind of silence, the kind that listens, the kind that measures distance, the kind that calculates risk. Once my name was spoken loosely, casually, with jokes attached to it. Now it moves differently, lower, slower, as if the air itself doesn't want to carry it too loudly. They don't laugh anymore, they watch. And watching tells me everything. I didn't arrive with noise. I didn't kick doors open. I didn't demand attention. Power doesn't announce itself. It arrives, and when it does, the room adjusts. Chairs straighten. Voices soften. Eyes shift before feet do. You can feel it before you see it. Shadows move before footsteps. That's how you know something has changed. They used to ask what I wanted. Now they ask where I came from. I smile, not because I'm amused, because they still don't understand. They think power has an origin story they can digest, a shortcut they can copy, a moment they can recreate. You don't see the years of silence, the pressure, the discipline, the hunger. They only see the result, and results make people nervous. They don't question me directly anymore. They circle, they hint. They test the edges of conversation like it might bite back. I let them. Observation is a privilege. I stand still and let them reveal themselves, because people always show you who they are when they think you're above them. Once they were comfortable around me. Comfort breeds disrespect. Now there's distance. And distance breeds caution. Caution looks a lot like respect. They don't mock what they don't understand. They fear it. Fear reshapes perception. Suddenly, everything I did wrong looks intentional. Every silence looks strategic. Every refusal looks calculated. Every absence looks deliberate. They rewrite history to make sense of the present. I let them. I don't correct narratives. Narratives protect me. I don't celebrate this. Celebration is for those who still need validation. I don't need to feel big, I know where I stand. From here, the world looks different, not better, clearer. You start to see patterns, who only respected you once you had leverage, who only listened when you no longer needed them, who switched sides without being asked. I keep track, not out of bitterness, out of awareness. Power sharpens memory. They look up now, carefully, as if sudden movements might cost them something. They don't ask me to explain myself. They ask if I have time. Time. One thing I never gave away for free. The one thing I protected when no one thought it mattered. Now they understand its value. Too late. I watch from above, but not with arrogance, with precision, because height doesn't make you superior. Perspective does. From here I can see who pretends to be loyal, who pretends to be brave, who pretends not to feel threatened. Pretending is exhausting. I let them exhaust themselves. I don't interrupt. I don't rush. I don't react. Reaction is beneath me now. I move when I decide. They sense it. That's why the energy changes when I enter, not excitement, tension. Tension means stakes. They feel watched because they are. Eyes always watch from below. They watch my posture, my silence, my timing. They search for cracks. There are none they can reach. They don't laugh anymore. They measure, they weigh. They reconsider words mid-sentence. They don't speak over me. They wait. Waiting is respect disguised as patience. I never demanded it. I earned it, not through force. Through consistency, through refusal to bend, through staying the same when pressure begged me to change. They used to think I was slow. Now they realize I was deliberate. Speed impresses amateurs. Control unsettles professionals. I control the pace. I decide when something begins. I decide when it ends. They don't question that. They feel it. Power reshapes the room without permission. I don't need to raise my voice. Silence carries further. I don't need to remind them who I am. They remind each other. Whispers travel faster than announcements. They ask where I came from. I smile, because if they really knew, they wouldn't ask. They'd understand why I don't flinch, why I don't overreact, why I don't chase approval, why I don't explain. I don't belong to their comfort. I belong to pressure. And pressure is familiar territory. From the top, you see how fragile certainty is, how quickly loyalty bends, how easily morals adjust, how fast admiration turns into fear. Fear is honest. Fear tells the truth admiration hides. They fear losing relevance. They fear misstepping. They fear being seen the way they once saw me. That fear teaches them manners. I don't correct them. I don't reassure them. Reassurance weakens boundaries. I keep mine clear. Cold, defined. They don't laugh anymore because laughter requires safety. And safety left the room quietly. I didn't remove it. Power does that naturally. I don't enjoy this. Enjoyment suggests attachment. I observe. Because observation keeps you ahead. I see who approaches with questions, who avoids eye contact, who suddenly remembers my name, names that wait now. Mine carries consequence, not because I threat, because I decide. Decisions shape outcomes, outcomes shape reputations. Reputations shape behavior, they behave differently around me. That tells me everything. I don't seek revenge. Revenge is emotional. I seek positioning. Positioning is permanent. I stand where my presence alone shifts dynamics. That's power unannounced, unforced, unmistakable. They don't laugh anymore, they whisper. And whispers are admissions, admissions that something has changed. That someone they underestimated is no longer available for comfort. I don't need to look down on them. Gravity does that work for me. From here I can see their moves before they make them. Shadows move before footsteps, always have. I don't interrupt their plans, I let them unfold. Prepared beats informed. Informed beats confident. I'm prepared, they feel it. That's why conversations slow when I'm near. That's why opinions soften. That's why certainty fades. They don't ask if I agree. They wait to see if I object. Objection carries weight now. Silence carries more. I don't celebrate the view. I respect it because height comes with exposure. And I didn't climb to be seen. I climbed to see. Now I see everything. Who learned, who adapted, who stayed the same. Staying the same is the loudest confession of all. They don't laugh anymore. Because laughter belongs to those who think the world is predictable. I am not predictable. I am consistent. There's a difference. Consistency builds fear in those who rely on chaos. I rely on structure, on patience, on timing. Timing wins wars without noise. I don't announce arrivals. I let absence do the work. Then presence, brief, measured, enough. Power doesn't shout. It doesn't chase. It doesn't prove. It arrives. And when it does, the room remembers everything it said before you got there. Remember too, not emotionally, strategically. From the top, memory becomes data, and data becomes leverage. They don't laugh anymore. They whisper my name, and I let them. Because whispers mean it's already too late to ignore me. I don't need to say anything. I already said it with my position, with my restraint, with my refusal to seek permission, with my calm. Calm terrifies those who expected noise. I stand here unimpressed, not because I'm above them, because I've been below and survived. That changes how you see the world. From here, everything looks smaller, clearer, exactly where it belongs. Confuse my calm for mercy, listen carefully, not because I'm raising my voice, but because I'm not. This is calm, controlled, measured, and it is not kindness. I know what you see when you look at me now. Composure, restraint, silence that doesn't rush to prove itself. You mistake that for softness. That mistake is common, and it's expensive. I don't seek revenge. I set limits. There's a difference you should learn before it's taught to you the hard way. Revenge is emotional. Limits are final. Revenge looks backward. Limits draw a line forward. I am not chasing the past. I am defining the future. This is the warning you didn't know you needed. Not screamed, not dramatized, not fueled by rage. Clear, because clarity is sharper than anger. I gave the world every chance to misunderstand me. Now I remove that privilege. Do not confuse my calm for mercy. Mercy explains itself. Mercy negotiates. Mercy hopes. I do none of those things. I observe, I decide, I act in that order. I've learned the value of boundaries the way most people do. Too late, through consequence. I used to tolerate things I should have ended. I used to absorb disrespect and call it patience. I used to keep doors open out of habit, not wisdom. Not anymore. The door is closed now, locked. No handle on your side. You don't get to knock. You don't get to plead. You don't get to explain. Access is earned before it's needed. You missed your window. This calm you feel around me, that's not peace, that's containment, like a sleeping volcano. Quiet on the surface, pressure underneath, unmoved by noise. I don't erupt without reason, but I also don't warn twice. This is the line. Notice how I didn't draw it in anger. I drew it in certainty. Certainty doesn't shake. I don't need to threat. Limits speak for themselves. Cross them, and remember who warned you. I'm not unpredictable, I am consistent. People who fear consistency usually have something to hide. I don't move with impulse, I move with intent. Intent doesn't rush. Intent waits until the moment can't be undone. You thought my silence meant permission, it meant preparation. You thought my restraint meant fear, it meant control. You thought my calm meant I had forgotten. It meant I remembered everything and chose when to respond. Do not confuse distance for disengagement. I am present. Always I see patterns, I see repetition. I see who pushes limits just to see if they exist. They do right here. This is where you stop. I don't raise my hand, I raise standards. I don't shout. I draw boundaries so clear they feel like walls. You don't get to test them for curiosity. Curiosity ends where my patience ends. And my patience has evolved. It's no longer endless. It's intentional. I don't hate you. Hate requires investment. You don't have that value. What you're feeling now is not my anger, it's my indifference turning solid. Indifference is dangerous because it doesn't care how loud you scream, it doesn't negotiate, it doesn't bend, it simply removes access. I don't need to destroy, I isolate, I don't need to punish, I disengage permanently. Understand this, I am calm because I am in control, and control is not weakness. It is the discipline to act only when necessary. You mistake volume for power. Power doesn't need an audience. Power doesn't need approval. Power doesn't need permission. It establishes terms. These are mine. Respect them, or learn why they exist. I don't seek revenge. I set limits. Say it again. I don't seek revenge. I set limits. This is not an emotional moment. This is administrative. This is policy. This is the final line between peace and something you are not prepared to face. I gave grace when it cost me. I gave patience when it weakened me. I gave silence when it was misinterpreted. Those days are finished. Now there is structure. Now there is consequence. Now there is clarity. Do not confuse my calm for mercy. Mercy asks. I don't ask. I decide. This calm is not forgiveness. Forgiveness is personal. This is professional. I have no interest in your excuses. No appetite for your explanations. No time for your regret. Regret arrives late. Boundaries arrive on time. You are standing at the edge of one now. Feel it. That tightening in the air. That hesitation in your thoughts. That instinct telling you to step back. Listen to it. It's smarter than your ego. I am not here to intimidate. I am here to be understood. Misunderstanding me is no longer an option. I move quietly because noise attracts attention. Attention attracts interference. I prefer results. Results don't need commentary. This calm you feel, it's lethal only if you ignore it. Like standing too close to something that hasn't moved in a long time. Stillness isn't safety, it's restraint. And restraint has limits. I won't chase you. I won't warn you again. I won't dramatize what happens next. I will simply respond appropriately, proportionately, decisively. That's what makes this dangerous. Not emotion, precision. I don't burn bridges. I remove roads. I don't slam doors. I lock them and throw away the map. If you're wondering where the line is, this is it. Right now, this moment, you've been informed. Cross it. And remember who warned you. Not with rage, not with noise, with calm. With clarity, with certainty. Do not confuse my calm for mercy, because mercy would have explained itself. I didn't, and that should tell you everything. I'm back again, and this time I stay, I am back. Not by chance, not by mistake, not by mercy, I am back, and this time I stay. Listen carefully, because this is not a warning. This is a declaration. Let them remember, let them fear, let them adapt. The world thought I vanished. They thought absence meant weakness. They thought silence meant surrender. They were wrong. I didn't return. I arrived. Not quietly, not humbly, not for applause. I arrived because time ran out, because patience ended, because the world needed to adjust. I don't come and go. I am permanence, like a throne that was always waiting, like a name carved into time, like a shadow that moves ahead of the light. I am not a guest here. I am the standard. I am the ruler of the space I occupy. I am the consequence of every choice ignored. They may look at me and see a person. I see a force, an inevitability, a reckoning that doesn't bend for hope, a reckoning that doesn't negotiate with expectation. I am back. I am not returning. I am arriving. Look around you. Notice how the air changes. Notice how whispers fill the silence. Notice how distance is measured carefully now. I don't demand respect. I don't bargain for loyalty. I don't wait for permission. I take my place. And the world shifts, whether it wants to or not. Let them remember every doubt they cast, every slight they thought small, every word they wrote without my presence in mind. Let them remember, let them fear. Fear is honest. Fear doesn't mask itself behind false smiles. Fear doesn't excuse itself. Fear stands still, looks you in the eyes, and waits. They feel it now. The weight of someone who refused to break, the force of someone who refused to vanish, the power of someone who rewrote themselves when the world left them broken. They ask themselves, who is this? How did this happen? How do we measure what we cannot contain? I smile, because the answer isn't theirs to give, it is mine to embody. I am the culmination of every scar, every betrayal, every sleepless night, every whispered insult, every shadow I endured. I am more than survival, I am supremacy. I am the echo that reverberates long after the footsteps have faded. Let them adapt, because this world no longer dictates me. It follows me, moves for me. Responds to my presence, my will, my certainty. I am not returning, I am not apologizing, I am not explaining, I am staying, and they will adjust. Because adjustment is the cost of reality, the cost of truth, the cost of power that does not bend. This is final, not in anger, not in rage, but in certainty. I have arrived, and nothing can unseat what has claimed its place. Let them remember, let them fear, let them adapt, because my shadow stretches longer than their patience. Because my name echoes louder than their mockery. Because my presence reshapes what they thought immutable. I am here. And I am unmovable, not because I am untouchable, but because I refuse to be irrelevant, because I refuse to kneel, because I refuse to disappear. This is not a comeback. This is permanence. This is dominance. This is truth. Look at me. Look at the scars. Look at the silence that was my forge. Look at the fire that was my teacher. Look at the patience that was my weapon. I am the sum of all they underestimated. I am the consequence of all they ignored. I am the answer to all they feared. I am back. And this time I stay. Let them remember, let them fear, let them adapt. Because the throne has always been mine, because the name was always waiting, because the world must now move according to me. I am here, I am permanent, I am inevitable. I'm not returning, I've arrived. And I will remain forever. Until they learn that absence is not surrender. Silence is not weakness, and patience is not mercy. I am back again, and this time I stay. Origin of the fire, I did not arrive broken, I was forged broken. The place where mercy never lived. I don't remember a beginning. I remember pressure. I remember heat. I remember learning very early that mercy was a myth told to people who had options. I was born in hell, not the kind with flames and demons. The kind that smiles while it starves you. The kind that watches and does nothing. The kind that tells you this is normal. Hell was the air I breathed. It was the walls around me. It was the silence after I spoke. It was the answer I never got. No shelter, no mercy, no escape. Suffering didn't arrive one day like a storm. It was always there. It was the default setting. I didn't wake up one morning and lose everything. I woke up every morning already empty. Hunger wasn't just in my stomach. It was in my chest, in my thoughts. The way I watched others live lives that felt illegal to me. Warmth was rare. Safety was imaginary. Comfort was something I saw in movies, not mirrors. I learned early that the world doesn't explain itself to you. It tests you quietly, relentlessly, and if you fail, it doesn't scream. It just keeps going without you. Hell wasn't dramatic. That's what made it dangerous. It was routine, predictable, cold. Every day felt the same. Wake up, survive, endure, repeat. No applause, no recognition. No reward for effort, just expectation. You are expected to carry weight you didn't choose. You are expected to bleed without making noise. You are expected to adapt or disappear. I learned to listen to the silence, because silence always tells the truth. Silence says no one is coming, no one cares, no one is watching. And when you realize that, something changes. You stop waiting, you stop hoping, you stop asking, you start calculating. I didn't grow up surrounded by love. I grew up surrounded by lessons, lessons carved with neglect, lessons reinforced with pain, lessons taught by absence. Every closed door said the same thing: figure it out or fall behind. Hell wasn't just a place, it was circumstance, born into limits, born into struggle, born into a system that doesn't pause for excuses. Hell was family that didn't protect, voices that criticized instead of guided, hands that pointed instead of lifted. Hell was society pretending fairness while rewarding strength, praising resilience after creating suffering, clapping for survivors while ignoring the battlefield. I watched people talk about kindness like it was universal, but kindness has conditions, and I didn't meet them. I watched people talk about opportunity like it was equal, but opportunity has a price. And I didn't have the currency, so I stood there, quiet, observing. Fire doesn't scream when it burns, it consumes. Ash doesn't complain about what it used to be. It adapts to the wind. I didn't ask why this was happening to me, because deep down I knew the answer didn't matter. The world doesn't care about reasons, it only cares about outcomes. No shelter, no mercy, no escape. That was the beginning, not a fall, a forge. Childhood without protection. I learned fast that there was no safety net. No hands waiting beneath me if I fell, no soft landing, no reset button. If I slipped, I hit the ground hard, and the ground didn't apologize. There was no one coming to save me, no dramatic rescue, no turning point delivered by someone else's courage, just me. Alone with problems too big for my age. Emotional neglect doesn't shout, it whispers. It whispers that you don't matter enough to be noticed, that your pain isn't urgent, that your needs can wait forever. And when you hear that long enough, you stop speaking. Betrayal didn't come from enemies, it came from expectations. From people who were supposed to care but didn't know how, or didn't want to, or didn't think they had to. Abandonment isn't always physical. Sometimes it's being present but unavailable, close but unreachable. I learned not to rely on comfort, because comfort disappears. I learned not to trust promises, because promises expire. I learned that weakness is punished, not immediately, but eventually. The moment you show it, the world takes notes. Every hesitation became a target. Every fear became leverage, every tear became proof, so I stopped crying where anyone could see. Pain stopped being something to avoid. It became something to endure, then something to expect, then something to use. Pain was not tragedy. Pain was training. Every disappointment sharpened me. Every ignored cry hardened me. Every unfair moment taught me efficiency. I didn't have the luxury of innocence. I had awareness. I learned to read rooms, to measure tone, to predict reactions. I learned when to speak, and more importantly, when not to. Silence became my armor. I watched other kids complain about boredom. I was busy surviving. I watched others get protected from consequences. I learned to absorb them. I watched people fail and get second chances. I learned not to fail because there was no second chance waiting for me. Mistakes were expensive and I couldn't afford them, so I became precise, controlled, alert. I learned to carry weight early. Responsibility before readiness, pressure before preparation, and something inside me adapted, not softly, sharply. I stopped asking for permission to endure. I stopped asking for understanding. I stopped expecting fairness. The world had made its position clear. You either adapt or you get erased. I wasn't raised by comfort. I was raised by consequences. Every scar became instruction. Every loss became data. And somewhere in that process, I stopped feeling fragile. Not because I was strong, but because fragility was too expensive. I didn't become hard to impress. I became impossible to break. Because when you grow up without protection, you learn to protect yourself. Relentlessly, I didn't come from nothing. I came from pressure, from fire, from a place where mercy never lived. And that place didn't destroy me, it built me. Childhood without protection, I was never protected. No one came when I cried. No one ran when the screams filled the room. No one stopped the world from hurting me. I learned early, weakness is punished, and punishment is not negotiable. The world doesn't wait for your tears, it doesn't pause for your fear, it doesn't ask if you're ready. I wasn't ready. I had nothing, no safety net, no soft landing, no one coming to save me. I learned to save myself, not out of courage, not out of choice, but necessity. Cold, raw, unyielding necessity. Every betrayal was a lesson. Every abandonment was training. Every empty promise was a map of the world. Mercy is rare. Trust is expensive. Love is optional. I learned to watch, to measure, to anticipate. Because when the world strikes first, hesitation kills. Weakness is a knife pointed at your back, and I was always standing still. I remember the first time I realized pain was not tragedy. Pain was preparation. Pain was the hammer forging me, though I didn't know it yet. I learned to endure silence because no one would speak for me. I learned to endure neglect because no one would care. I learned to endure betrayal because no one would intervene. The world didn't shield me. It didn't whisper you're safe. It shouted prove yourself or disappear, and I disappeared anyway. A piece at a time, but each fragment returned stronger, sharper, less forgiving. I learned to move in shadows because the light exposed weakness, and weakness was devoured. I learned early that the world rewards only the strong, not the kind, not the honest. Not the innocent, only the strong. I became the strong, not because I wanted to, because I had no other option. Every wound became armor, every insult became a sword, every abandonment became a shield. I learned that the world does not rescue the fragile, it steps over them, it writes them off. It forgets them. I remember the nights, the empty rooms, the echoes of voices that should have loved me, but didn't. I realized then no one would come, no one would protect. No one cared enough to intervene. And that realization, that brutal, cold truth, it was freedom. Because once I accepted it, I could stop waiting, stop hoping, stop begging. I became my own protector, my own judge, my own executioner if I failed. I learned to fight before I knew the word for battle. I learned to survive before I knew what life meant. I learned to rule my fear before anyone tried to teach me courage. I was forged in absence, tempered in neglect, hardened by abandonment. And every time the world tested me, every time it tried to break me, I remembered the first lesson: weakness is punished. I have carried that lesson into everything I became, every choice, every action, every silent calculation. I don't cry for help, I don't wait for rescue, I don't expect kindness. I act, I endure, I survive, I rise, because the world never saved me, and I refused to remain small. I was alone, I was unprotected, I was underestimated. Perfect. For the world builds monsters from its abandoned children, and I became one. I'm the consequence of every hand that let go, every voice that ignored me, every heart that turned away. I'm the product of a childhood without protection, and I am unstoppable. No safety net, no one coming to save, no forgiveness for weakness, no mercy for hesitation. I learned, I adapted, I conquered. I was trained by absence, hardened by neglect, forged by betrayal. and now. I am the force that no one can dismiss, the shadow that no one anticipates, the power born from the void. I am the lesson the world forgot to teach because weakness is punished. And I survived. I am the proof. I am the weapon. I am the consequence. I am the child who had no protection, and I will never need it again. Watching others be loved, I saw it every day. I watched it happen to other people, not from a distance, not from another world, from right beside them. I watched warmth land on shoulders that weren't mine. I watched voices soften when they spoke to others. I watched patience appear for mistakes I was never allowed to make. They were held when they broke. I was told to stand. They were forgiven when they failed. I was judged for surviving. They were listened to. I was tolerated. And at first I didn't hate them. I studied them. I watched how love changed posture, how safety made people careless, how protection gave them the freedom to be weak. They laughed without scanning the room. They trusted without checking exits. They rested without fear of what tomorrow would demand. That fascinated me because I couldn't relate. I stood on the outside of their normal, close enough to see it, too far to touch it. They spoke about family like it was oxygen. I treated it like weather, unpredictable and dangerous. They talked about home like it was sanctuary. I learned early that home could be a battlefield. They assumed someone would catch them if they fell. I calculated the impact before I ever stepped forward. And slowly something shifted inside me. Not envy, rage, because envy wants what others have. Rage questions why you were denied it. I didn't want their lives. I wanted answers. Why them? Why not me? What invisible rule had been written before I arrived? I watched them get encouragement for effort. I only received attention for results. I watched them get second chances. I learned to survive on first attempts. I watched them be praised for being themselves. I was told to be less loud, less intense, less difficult, less honest. I watched the system bend for them. I felt it harden around me, and that's when it hit me. This wasn't random. This wasn't bad luck. This was selection. They were chosen. I was tested. Say it again. They were chosen. I was tested. Chosen for care, tested for endurance. Chosen for protection, tested for resilience. Chosen for comfort, tested for pressure. I wasn't raised to be held. I was raised to withstand. And once I saw that clearly, I stopped asking to switch places, because tests don't exist to be fair. They exist to reveal. I realized something they never had to learn. Love makes you soft. Absence makes you sharp. Safety creates expectation. Struggle creates awareness. I learned to read tone instead of trust words. I learned to notice silence instead of believing promises. I learned that kindness disappears when it's inconvenient. They grew up expecting support. I grew up expecting impact. Every time I watched them be loved, it carved something into me. Not longing, definition. I wasn't built for belonging. I was built for pressure. I wasn't meant to fit inside their world. I was meant to survive outside it. And that realization was painful, because it meant accepting that I would never be like them. I would never move through life unguarded. I would never be comfort first. I would never be innocent in the way they were. But it also meant something else, something powerful. If I wasn't chosen for love, then I was chosen for something harder, something sharper, something dangerous. They were protected so they could grow gently. I was unprotected so I could grow strong. And once I understood that, I stopped resenting them. I started separating myself. I stopped trying to be seen the way they were seen. I stopped trying to be treated the way they were treated. I stopped asking for entry into rooms I was never meant to sit in. I embraced the outsider position, because outsiders see patterns insiders ignore. Outsiders hear truth beneath politeness. Outsiders learn self-reliance before dependency. They needed approval to move forward. I learned to move without permission. They needed reassurance to continue. I learned to continue without reassurance. They had love to fall back on. I had myself. And that was terrifying, but it was also freeing. Because once you accept that you are alone, you stop negotiating with the world. You stop waiting for fairness. You stop expecting mercy. You stop needing validation. You become precise, detached, focused. You stop asking why the rules don't favor you. You learn to win anyway. They were chosen. I was tested. And tests don't end with applause, they end with transformation. That's where the outsider is born, not bitter, not broken, aware. And awareness is the first step toward power. The first crack when innocence died, there is a moment. Everyone has one. A single moment where the world stops pretending, where the mask slips, where the lie collapses, where innocence doesn't fade, it snaps. Mine didn't die quietly. It didn't drift away over time. It shattered. I remember the exact feeling, not the details, not the faces, the feeling, that hollow drop in the chest, that sudden stillness inside the noise, that instant where something says, "Oh, so this is how it really works." That was the first crack. The moment I understood that fairness was a story told to keep people obedient. That kindness had conditions, that loyalty had limits, that love was fragile when tested by inconvenience. I learned that day that being good doesn't protect you, it exposes you. I learned that honesty makes you a target, that trust makes you vulnerable. That hope is dangerous when the world is hungry. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, that came later. In that moment I went quiet. Because when innocence dies, it doesn't leave behind anger first. It leaves clarity, cold, sharp, unforgiving clarity. I realized no one was coming, not this time, not next time, not ever. The rules had changed without warning, and no one bothered to explain them. You either adapted or you broke. I watched people choose convenience over truth. I watched promises dissolve under pressure. I watched the same mouths that spoke loyalty go silent when it mattered. And that's when I stopped assuming people meant what they said. I started watching what they did. I stopped expecting protection. I started calculating risk. I stopped believing words. I started measuring outcomes. That crack didn't make me cruel, it made me precise. Because once innocence dies, you don't see the world as good or evil. You see it as forces, pressure, incentives, fear. You realize people do betray you because they're monsters. They betray you because they're weak. And weakness is predictable. That's the lesson innocence never teaches. I stopped asking, why would they do this? I started asking, what do they gain? And suddenly everything made sense. The silence, the distance, the excuses. I wasn't shocked anymore. I was prepared. That was the day I stopped being surprised by disappointment. The day I stopped romanticizing struggle. The day I accepted that pain wasn't personal, it was structural. The system doesn't reward virtue. It rewards leverage. It doesn't protect the honest. It uses them. And in that realization, something hardened inside me. Not bitterness, armor. I didn't become heartless. I became selective. I didn't lose empathy. I learned boundaries. I didn't turn cold. I learned temperature control. I stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't bleed for me. I stopped explaining myself to people committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped offering softness where strength was required. Because innocence doesn't survive reality, only adaptation does. That crack was painful, but it was necessary, because before that moment I thought the world was broken. After that moment I understood it was working exactly as designed. And if I wanted to survive, I had to change. That was the first crack, the beginning of the end of who I used to be. And the beginning of something far more dangerous, reaching for help and finding nothing. The world didn't break me, it revealed itself. I did what they told me to do. I asked, I reached out. I followed the script they hand to the desperate. Speak up, ask for help, trust the system. Someone will listen. So I did, and nothing answered. No understanding, no patience, no protection, just silence dressed up as procedure. I didn't beg at first. I explained. I chose my words carefully. I lowered my voice. I made myself reasonable, palatable, small enough not to offend, and still dismissed, passed along, labeled, ignored. I learned quickly that asking for help makes people uncomfortable. Not because they can't help you, but because your struggle forces them to admit they won't. They nod, they sigh, they promise to look into it. Then they disappear. That was my first lesson about authority. Authority doesn't exist to save you, it exists to manage you. I went to systems built with slogans, support, care, opportunity. Words polished smooth enough to reflect hope. But when I stood in front of them with real weight on my shoulders, they cracked. Forms instead of faces, rules instead of judgment, delays instead of decisions. I learned that bureaucracy is just apathy with better branding. You become a number, a file, a case, and cases don't bleed. They don't panic at night. They don't feel fear crawl into their chest. They don't carry exhaustion like a second spine. So the system stays clean and you stay drowning. I watched authority figures speak with confidence they hadn't earned. They talked down, they simplified pain, they reduced survival to attitude. Try harder, be patient, wait your turn. They've never waited while hungry. They've never been patient with a clock counting down on their life. They've never had to choose between dignity and survival. But they were comfortable, and comfort breeds arrogance. I realized something dangerous that day. The system doesn't fail. It functions exactly as designed. It filters out the inconvenient. It delays the desperate until they give up or break. It rewards those who already stand inside it, and punishes those who knock from the outside. I didn't feel angry at first. I felt stupid. Stupid for believing the promise. Stupid for thinking effort would be met with empathy. Stupid for assuming fairness was more than marketing. That embarrassment burned deeper than rage, because it meant accepting a truth no one wants to say out loud. No one is coming. Not the government, not the institutions, not the people with titles and authority and polished language. They don't rush toward pain, they avoid it, they contain it. They manage it from a distance so it doesn't stain their hands. I asked for understanding. I was told to wait. I asked for guidance. I was given pamphlets. I asked for relief. I was given excuses. That's when the mask fully came off. The world doesn't respond to need. It responds to leverage. It doesn't respect suffering. It respects power. And in that realization, something shifted inside me. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped trying to be heard. I stopped believing that clarity would save me. Because clarity only works when someone cares, and caring is rare, especially when it costs something. I understood then help is a myth sold to keep people compliant. Rescue is a fantasy designed to delay action. Hope, when outsourced, is a leash. They tell you to wait so you don't move. They tell you to trust so you don't build. They tell you to stay calm so you don't become dangerous. I decided something in that silence. If no one was coming, then I would. For myself, I withdrew, not in defeat, in preparation. I stopped asking permission. I stopped seeking validation. I stopped wasting breath on doors that only open for the chosen. I redirected everything inward. Every disappointment became fuel. Every rejection became confirmation. Every closed door taught me something valuable. They weren't going to help me, so I would outgrow the need. I wouldn't be supported, so I would become unbreakable. I wouldn't be rescued, so I would become the force no one could ignore. This wasn't bitterness, it was alignment. I finally saw the world clearly, not cruel, efficient. It rewards those who adapt. It forgets those who wait. And waiting is a luxury I could no longer afford, so I stopped reaching out and started building inward. Strength instead of appeals, discipline instead of hope, preparation instead of prayers. Let them keep their systems, let them keep their silence. I learned the most important rule they never teach you. When the world shows you indifference, believe it and respond accordingly. When kindness became a liability, I used to believe kindness was strength. That patience would be returned. That honesty would be respected. That giving people the benefit of the doubt made me better. I learned the price of that belief. Slowly at first, then all at once. Every time I opened my hand, someone took more than I offered. Every time I lowered my guard, someone stepped closer with intent. Every time I trusted, I paid. Say it again. Every time I trusted, I paid. Not in lessons, in losses. I gave time to people who drained it. Energy to people who wasted it. Loyalty to people who studied it like a weakness. They smiled while they measured how far they could push. They thanked me while planning their exit. They called me real while benefiting from my consistency. Kindness made me predictable. Predictability made me exploitable. I wasn't betrayed by monsters. I was exploited by opportunists. People who smelled softness and mistook it for permission. They learned my patterns before I learned their intentions. They waited for moments when I'd say yes without thinking. They learned that my empathy would silence my instincts, and they used it, not with cruelty, with calculation. They didn't attack. They leaned on my reliability. They leaned on my understanding. They leaned until I was carrying weight that was never mine. And when I finally felt it, the exhaustion, the imbalance, the quiet resentment, they called me selfish. Isn't that how it always goes? You give without limits, they take without gratitude. And the moment you step back, you're the villain. That was the moment something snapped inside me. Not anger, awareness. I realized kindness without boundaries isn't virtue. It's self-neglect, and self-neglect invites predators. Every system exploits the unguarded. Every environment consumes the exposed. Every world tests the soft. I wasn't losing because I lacked morals. I was losing because I lacked rules. I trusted intentions instead of outcomes. I listened to words instead of patterns. I excused behavior instead of recording it. And the cost added up. Missed opportunities, burned time, drained focus. All because I thought being good would be enough. Goodness without discernment is just weakness dressed nicely. Every time I trusted, I paid, with peace, with progress, with pieces of myself I didn't get back. They told me to stay open. They never warned me about becoming empty. They praised empathy. They never mentioned defense. They celebrated vulnerability. They never discussed recovery, so I learned the hard way. Kindness is not free, it must be earned. Trust is not default, it is conditional. Access is not owed, it is granted. And once I accepted that, I stopped bleeding quietly. I stopped explaining myself to people who benefited from my confusion. I stopped overgiving to prove my worth. I stopped mistaking tolerance for loyalty. I didn't become cruel, I became exact. I didn't lose compassion, I learned containment. I didn't shut down, I locked the doors, because a fortress isn't heartless, it's intentional. I learned to say no without guilt, to observe without reacting, to pause instead of pouring. I learned that softness must be protected, not advertised. That trust must be layered, not dumped. That access must be earned through consistency, not emotion. And suddenly the people who only came to take disappeared. The ones who stayed adjusted. The ones who complained exposed themselves. And that's when I knew. Kindness was never the problem. Unfiltered kindness was. I was feeding people who never planned to give back. I was investing in places that had no return. I was extending grace to those who saw it as leverage. Every time I trusted, I paid, but I stopped paying blindly. I changed the terms. Now kindness comes with structure, trust comes with observation, loyalty comes with proof. I no longer offer my best to everyone, only to those who demonstrate respect for it. This isn't bitterness, it's refinement. This isn't coldness, it's precision. I didn't lose my heart, I armored it. And armor doesn't make you evil, it makes you durable. Let them call it selfish. Let them say you changed. Let them miss the version of you that was easier to use, because growth always looks like betrayal to those who benefited from your weakness. Every time I trusted, I paid. Now I collect information, I collect patterns, I collect strength. And I give nothing without intention. That's not darkness. That's survival mastered. That's power learned the hard way. And I will never apologize for it again. They labeled me before I chose myself. They named me before I understood what naming meant. Before I had language for resistance. Before I had armor. Before I had the strength to refuse. They looked at me once and decided. Too much. Say it slowly. Too much, too loud, too intense, too opinionated, too restless, too unwilling to shrink. They didn't say it with anger, they said it with certainty, like a diagnosis. Then came the next word, problem. Not misunderstood, not untrained. Not unfinished, a problem. Something to be managed, contained, corrected. I felt it everywhere, in classrooms, in conversations, in silence that followed my honesty. I asked questions they didn't want to answer. I noticed cracks they preferred to paint over. I refused to pretend comfort was truth. And for that, I became difficult. That was the word they used when they couldn't control me. Difficult means you don't submit easily. Difficult means you don't accept surface-level answers. Difficult means you resist being shaped into something smaller. They never ask why you're difficult. They just decide you are, and once a label sticks, everything you do gets filtered through it. Your confidence becomes arrogance. Your boundaries become hostility. Your silence becomes threat. You're guilty before you act, condemned before you choose. They didn't wait for me to become something. They assumed. They projected. They wrote my role before I read the script, and for a long time I fought it. I tried to soften my edges, lower my voice, dilute my truth. I tried to prove them wrong. I tried to be easy, approachable, acceptable. I apologized for existing at full volume. I edited myself mid-sentence. I swallowed instincts that told me something was off. And the labels didn't disappear. They multiplied. Because here's the truth they never tell you. Once they decide who you are, changing yourself only confirms their power. You can't win a game you didn't agree to play. They didn't want me improved. They wanted me manageable. They didn't want my growth. They wanted my compliance. And the moment I realized that, everything shifted. I stopped asking how to be liked. I started asking who benefits from me being smaller. I stopped resisting the label. I examined it. Villain, outcast, problem, difficult, too much. And suddenly I saw the pattern. Every force that disrupts comfort gets labeled dangerous. Every voice that refuses silence gets marked unstable. Every person who doesn't fit neatly gets framed as the threat. History doesn't call them villains forever, just at the beginning. The label always comes before the transformation, because society assigns roles early, not based on truth, based on convenience. Heroes are safe. Villains challenge structure. Heroes follow paths. Villains create friction. Heroes reinforce the story. Villains expose it. And I understood something brutal. I was never going to be the hero in their story. I asked the wrong questions, saw the wrong things, refused the wrong compromises, so they assigned me the other role, the one they always assign to people they can't control. The villain. At first, that word scared me because villains are isolated. Villains are blamed. Villains are remembered only for their destruction. But then I realized villains are also free. They stop seeking permission. They stop chasing approval. They stop explaining themselves to people invested in misunderstanding them. Villains don't beg to belong. They build their own ground and stand on it. The moment I accepted the label, it lost its power. I stopped correcting people. I stopped clarifying intentions. I stopped defending my tone. I let them think whatever they needed to think to stay comfortable, because clarity for them required my silence, and I was done paying that price. I stopped resisting the role, and something incredible happened. The weight lifted. No more pretending, no more self-censorship. No more shrinking to survive rooms built for lesser versions of me. I didn't become cruel. I became unapologetic. I didn't become reckless. I became deliberate. I didn't reject morality. I rejected submission disguised as virtue. I chose myself, not the version they approved of, the real one, the intense one, the observant one, the unfiltered one, the one who doesn't fit because fitting was never the goal. I embraced the villain role not because I wanted chaos, but because truth looks like chaos to systems built on comfort. They said I was too much, so I stopped giving them pieces. They said I was a problem, so I stopped solving theirs. They said I was difficult, so I stopped being accessible. I became selective, focused, dangerous in my clarity. And the irony, the moment I stopped trying to be understood, I became unstoppable. Because nothing is more powerful than a person who no longer seeks permission to exist. They labeled me before I chose myself, but I chose myself anyway. And now, their labels don't define me. They describe the fear I trigger in systems that know I will not kneel, I will not dilute, I will not disappear quietly. Let them whisper, let them warn each other. Let them paint me as the threat, because villains aren't born, they're assigned. And once they accept it, they stop playing defense. They start building empires. This is not my apology. This is my acceptance. And that acceptance is the beginning of their problem. Alone in a crowd, I learned something early. You can be surrounded by people and still be untouched. You can hear voices and feel unheard. You can stand in the middle of noise and realize none of it is meant for you. I was never alone in rooms. I was alone inside them, faces everywhere. Laughter bouncing off walls. Conversations layered on conversations. And still nothing reached me. Because connection isn't proximity, it's recognition, and I wasn't recognized. I was present, I was visible, but I was never seen. They talked at me, not to me. They listened only long enough to reply. They smiled without curiosity, so I stopped reaching, not out of bitterness, out of pattern recognition. Every time I opened myself, the room stayed closed. Every time I spoke honestly, the air went cold, so I learned the language of silence. At first, silence felt like punishment, like exile, like proof that something was wrong with me. Why am I always the outsider? Why do I feel detached even when I'm included? Why does belonging feel performative? Those questions haunted me until silence stopped hurting, until it became familiar, comfortable, predictable. Silence never betrayed me. Silence never misunderstood my tone, never twisted my intentions, never demanded I soften my edges. Silence let me breathe. And in that quiet, something changed. Loneliness didn't break me, it sharpened me. When you stop trying to be included, you start watching. You notice patterns others miss. You see who talks just to be heard, who laughs to hide fear, who needs an audience to feel real. You observe who leads and who just follows noise. You see alliances built on convenience, friendships fueled by distraction, loyalty that dissolves under pressure. While everyone else was performing, I was studying. Silence turned me into an observer. I learned who people become when they think no one important is watching. I saw kindness used as currency, confidence mistaken for dominance, volume confused for power. I saw how crowds reward sameness, how difference makes people uncomfortable, how being alone is framed as weakness because solitude can't be controlled. Crowds want reflection, they don't want depth, and I stopped resenting that. Because crowds are loud, but they're fragile. They need agreement to survive. I didn't. Being alone forced me inward. No validation to lean on, no applause to chase, no identity borrowed from others, just me, my thoughts, my instincts, my standards. Loneliness stripped away performance. There was no one to impress, so I stopped pretending. I asked myself questions no one else wanted the answers to. What do I believe when no one's listening? What do I stand for without witnesses? Who am I when approval is unavailable? Those answers didn't come softly. They came sharp, uncomfortable, demanding responsibility. Because when you're alone, there's no one to blame, no group to hide behind, no consensus to outsource decisions to, just choice, just consequence. And that terrified me until it empowered me. I realized something dangerous. Most people fear being alone because it means facing themselves without distraction. I stayed. I sat with the discomfort. I let the silence speak. And it told me the truth. That I don't need crowds to validate my existence. That my worth isn't multiplied by witnesses. That strength built in isolation lasts longer than strength borrowed from approval. I stopped mistaking loneliness for lack. It was clarity. I wasn't rejected. I was redirected toward independence, toward self-trust, toward a standard that didn't fluctuate with opinion. I watched people fear being alone with their thoughts. I embraced it because solitude taught me discipline, taught me patience, taught me how to listen to instincts instead of noise. While they chased belonging, I built alignment. While they sought reassurance, I forged certainty. And the more I accepted being alone, the less alone I felt. Because I had myself fully, without compromise, without dilution. Crowds stopped intimidating me. Their judgment lost weight. Their approval lost value. I could walk into any room now and not need it. That's real power, not being wanted, not being praised, but being self-contained. Self-directed, unmoved. Loneliness didn't make me bitter, it made me precise. I choose my words carefully now, my energy selectively, my connections intentionally. I don't need to belong everywhere, I belong to myself. And if that means standing alone, so be it. Because standing alone with conviction is stronger than standing together in confusion. I no longer fear empty rooms. I don't fear silence. I don't fear being misunderstood. Those fears belong to people who need mirrors. I'm not afraid of my reflection. I've met myself in the quiet. I know what I'm capable of when no one is watching, and that knowledge is unshakable. So let them gather, let them whisper, let them form circles and call it strength. I don't need the crowd. The crowd needs agreement. I need truth. And I found it alone. If I am alone, then I answer only to myself. NIGHTS of self-destruction, the war didn't start outside. It started at night. When the world went quiet and there was nowhere left to run. No noise to hide behind. No faces to perform for. No distractions to numb the questions. Just me. And the version of myself I didn't want to face. Those nights were violent, not with fists, with thoughts. Thoughts that circled like predators, every memory sharpened, every failure replayed, every weakness dragged into the light. I questioned everything, my worth, my direction, my right to keep going. Rage didn't disappear when I was alone. It turned inward like a blade with nowhere else to go. I hated the hesitation in my voice, hated the doubt in my chest, hated the part of me that still wanted approval from a world that had already shown me its teeth. So I punished myself with overthinking, with reliving moments I should have buried, with conversations that never happened, with endings I didn't get to choose. Sleep became an enemy, because sleep meant dreaming, and dreaming meant remembering. So I stayed awake, let the darkness sit with me, let it talk. It asked dangerous questions. What if they were right about you? What if you really are the problem? What if all this struggle leads nowhere? Those questions didn't come gently. They came like accusations, and some nights I almost agreed. There were moments I felt myself cracking, not loudly, quietly, like something splitting beneath the surface while the outside stayed calm. I smiled during the day. I functioned. I delivered. But at night, I dismantled myself piece by piece. I analyzed every flaw, every mistake, every reason I might fail again. I pushed myself to the edge of exhaustion just to feel something other than uncertainty. That's the truth no one tells you. Strength isn't born in confidence. It's born in surviving your own mind when it turns against you. Those nights weren't dramatic. They were relentless, a slow erosion. I stood alone with my worst thoughts and didn't flinch, didn't escape. Didn't numb myself with lies. I let the darkness speak because I wanted to know it. I wanted to know what it could do to me, and what I realized changed everything. The darkness wasn't trying to destroy me, it was testing me. Every doubt was a challenge, every hateful thought was a gate, and I was standing at the center of it all, deciding whether to collapse or harden. I learned something brutal. If you don't control your inner chaos, it will decide your limits for you, so I stopped running from it. I sat with the rage, let it burn without spilling outward. Let it show me where I was still weak, where I still wanted comfort, where I still expected fairness. That's where the real fight happened, not between me and the world, but between the version of me that wanted relief and the version that demanded evolution. Some nights I wanted to quit, not dramatically, just quietly disappear from the effort, stop pushing, stop expecting more from myself, stop carrying the weight. That temptation was seductive. Because surrender promises rest, but rest without growth is decay, and I could feel it. Every time I considered giving in, something inside me recoiled. Not hope, pride, not the loud kind, the silent refusal to become small. I reminded myself, no one is coming, no one is saving you from yourself. If you break alone, so I didn't break. I bent. I absorbed the pressure. I learned to hold rage without letting it rule me. I learned to acknowledge pain without letting it define me. That's what control really is. Not the absence of darkness, but mastery over it. I didn't purge my anger, I disciplined it. Turned it into fuel. Turned sleepless nights into strategy sessions. Turned self-doubt into self-interrogation. Why does this hurt? What does it reveal? What must be sharpened? Every weakness became data. Every emotional spike became information. I wasn't destroying myself anymore. I was dissecting myself. Carefully, ruthlessly, with purpose. That's the difference between collapse and transformation. I stopped asking for peace. I asked for resilience. I stopped chasing comfort. I chased clarity. Those nights taught me restraint, how to feel everything without acting on impulse, how to sit in the storm without becoming it. I didn't numb the pain. I learned from it. I didn't drown in the darkness. I learned how to breathe inside it. And somewhere in that long stretch of nights, something shifted. The thoughts lost their power, not because they vanished, but because I stopped believing them. I saw them for what they were, fear disguised as logic, old wounds pretending to be truth. I stopped identifying with every thought, stopped treating doubt as prophecy. I chose discipline over emotion, will over impulse, direction over despair. That's when I knew if I could survive my own worst nights, the world had nothing left to threaten me with. I had already faced the most dangerous enemy. The one who knew all my fears, all my insecurities, all my history, and I was still standing. Calm, controlled, unbroken, those nights didn't weaken me. They burned away what couldn't survive pressure. They killed the part of me that needed reassurance. They murdered the illusion of safety. And what remained was will, cold, focused, unapologetic. I didn't come out softer, I came out precise, measured, unshakable. So if you're in that place right now, alone with your thoughts, feeling like you're fighting yourself, listen carefully. This isn't the end. This is the forge. Don't run, don't numb it, don't collapse. Sit in it, learn from it, control it. Because once you conquer your own darkness, nothing outside you can ever dominate you again. I fought myself, and I won. The voice that wouldn't die, there was a voice they couldn't silence. Not with neglect, not with ridicule, not with exhaustion. A voice that whispered when I was weakest. That growled when I wanted to disappear. That refused to let me fade quietly. It wasn't gentle, it didn't comfort me. It challenged me. Every time I told myself, this is enough, it answered, no, this is where you decide. I tried to ignore it, tried to bury it under routine, under numbness, under the lie that surrender could feel like peace. But it kept speaking, low, steady, unrelenting. It didn't promise happiness, it promised survival. It didn't say, you'll be loved. It said, you'll endure. That voice wasn't hope in the way people romanticize it. It was defiance, raw, angry, unwilling to be erased. It reminded me of everything they tried to strip away. My edge, my hunger, my refusal to vanish without a mark. When I felt smallest, it grew louder. When I questioned my worth, it sharpened its tone. It said, if you disappear now, they win. And that was enough, not love, not validation, spite, rage. The unwillingness to give the world the satisfaction of my collapse. That voice didn't ask for permission. It didn't wait for confidence. It rose in the middle of doubt and said, stand anyway. I listened. Not because it was kind, but because it was true. It told me something no one else ever did. You don't need to be healed to be dangerous. You don't need to be whole to be relentless. You don't need approval to move forward. You need resolve. That voice reminded me of every moment I survived when I shouldn't have. Every night I stayed when escape felt easier. Every time I chose effort over erasure. It didn't speak in long speeches. It spoke in commands. Breathe, move, don't stop. When I wanted silence, it demanded action. When I wanted to sleep forever, it forced my eyes open. That's when I understood. This voice wasn't there to save me. It was there to weaponize me. It took my pain and hardened it into direction. Took my anger and refined it into focus. Took my isolation and turned it into independence. It didn't let me disappear into self-pity. It dragged me forward by the collar. It said, if the world won't make room for you, carve your own space. So I stopped asking for acceptance, stopped waiting to be understood. I embraced the role they fear, the one who doesn't beg, the one who does fold. The one who doesn't require permission to exist loudly. That voice didn't tell me I was special. It told me I was responsible for my strength, for my discipline, for my future. And responsibility is heavier than hope, but it's real. Hope fades. Responsibility forces action. That voice turned my loneliness into sovereignty. If no one was coming good, if no one cared perfect, that meant I answered only to myself. No expectations to meet, no masks to maintain, no approval to chase, just standards, mine, and I raised them every day. That voice didn't die when things improved. It stayed, watching, correcting, demanding more. It became the judge inside me that didn't tolerate excuses, the fire that refused to be extinguished, the presence that said, you are not allowed to quit on yourself. And now when I speak, when I move, when I decide, that voice isn't a whisper anymore. It's a command, clear, controlled, absolute. It reminds me who I am when the world tries to reduce me. Not a victim, not a casualty. Not a footnote. I am the consequence of everything they underestimated. I am what remains when comfort is removed. I am what survives when sympathy is gone. And that voice, the one that wouldn't die, it doesn't ask me to be liked. It asked me to be relentless, so let them doubt, let them misunderstand. Let them hope I disappear, I won't, because as long as that voice speaks, I move, I endure, I advance, and I do not stop. The voice that wouldn't die, there was a moment when everything inside me went quiet. Not peaceful, empty, like the aftermath of an explosion where the ringing stops and you're left with dust and silence. I thought that was the end. I thought that meant I was done. Because when you've lost enough, when you've been stripped down far enough, silence feels like surrender. But it was. Something survived, small at first, barely audible, not a comforting voice, not a gentle one, a defiant one. A voice that didn't beg me to keep going. It didn't promise happiness. It didn't offer light. It said something far more dangerous. No. No to disappearing. No to folding quietly. No to becoming another story that ends unfinished. That voice didn't speak in hope. It spoke in refusal. I tried to ignore it. I told myself it was pointless. That resistance was just delayed defeat. But it kept returning, in the pauses between breaths, in the space after every failure. In the seconds before I almost gave up, it didn't say, "You will win." It said, "You will not vanish." And that was enough, because survival doesn't start as hope, it starts as spite. A stubborn, unkillable resistance to being erased. That voice reminded me of something brutal. They haven't finished you off. Life tried, people tried, circumstances tried, and still you're here, scarred, exhausted, but present. That voice didn't sound kind, it sounded angry. Angry that I was even considering surrender. Angry that I'd let the world convince me that my existence needed permission. It reminded me of every time I was counted out, every time I was dismissed, every time my absence would have made things easier for them. And it said, "Is this really how you leave?" That question burned, because disappearing would have been convenient, quiet, undemanding, painless for everyone else. But I was never built for convenience. That voice wasn't optimism, it was war. A low, steady drumbeat in my chest that refused to stop. It grew louder every time I was pushed aside, every time I was underestimated, every time I was told to be smaller, quieter, easier. It fed on rejection, it sharpened itself on doubt, and I realized something terrifying. This voice wasn't here to save me. It was here to harden me. It didn't want me healed, it wanted me forged. Hope wants comfort. This voice wanted endurance. It didn't promise relief. It promised persistence, and persistence outlasts everything. I stopped asking myself if things would get better. I started asking something else. How much can I take and still stand? That's when the shift happened. The voice stopped sounding small. It stopped sounding desperate. It became calm, certain, uninterested in approval. It no longer argued with the world. It didn't need to. It knew something the world didn't. I'm still here. And that fact alone is an act of defiance. You don't need to be loud to be dangerous. You don't need to be celebrated to be unstoppable. You just need to refuse to disappear. That voice taught me restraint. When to stay silent, when to move, when to wait. It told me to stop explaining myself. Stop justifying my pain. Stop asking permission to exist as I am. It said, let them misunderstand you. Let them mislabel you. Let them underestimate you. Because while they're busy deciding who you are, you're becoming something they can't stop. That voice wasn't gentle. It didn't cradle me. It stood me up, straightened my spine, tightened my jaw. It reminded me that survival is a skill, and I've mastered it. Every time I was supposed to disappear, I adapted. Every time I was supposed to give up, I adjusted. Every time I was supposed to break, I learned. That voice carries all of it. The nights I didn't sleep. The moments I almost quit. The days I carried everything alone. It carries the proof. And now it doesn't whisper anymore. It doesn't need to. It waits. Patient, controlled, certain, because it knows I am no longer fighting to be saved. I am fighting to be undeniable. So if you hear that voice inside you, the one that refuses to go quiet, don't silence it. That's not weakness. That's not madness. That's the core of you refusing erasure. Nurture it. Feed it with discipline. Sharpen it with restraint. Because one day, that voice won't just keep you alive. It will make you unstoppable. And when the world finally looks at you and asks how you're still standing, you won't answer. You'll just keep walking forward. unfading, unfinished, unkillable. The choice, collapse or conquer. There comes a moment, not loud, not cinematic, no music, no witnesses, just a quiet crossroad inside your chest. That's where I stood. After the nights of war, after the doubt, after the self-destruction, after the voice that refused to die. There was no applause waiting for me, no relief, no sudden sunrise, just a simple, brutal question. Do you collapse or do you conquer? And understand this, collapse doesn't mean screaming or falling apart. Collapse is quieter than that. It looks like giving up on the inside while still functioning on the outside. It looks like settling, like shrinking your ambition so it fits inside other people's comfort, like choosing numbness because it hurts less than growth. Collapse is choosing survival over dominance. And conquering isn't heroic, it's cold, it's lonely. It's choosing the harder road with no guarantee of reward. I didn't feel brave. I felt tired, exhausted from fighting myself, exhausted from expecting fairness, exhausted from hoping the world would soften. That's when it hit me. Hope was never meant to save me. Resolve was, hope waits. Resolve moves, hope asks. Resolve decides. I realized something terrifying. No one was holding a gun to my head. No one was forcing me to stay small. If I failed from this point forward, it would be my choice. And that truth burns, because once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't blame your past forever. You can't keep pointing at scars as an excuse to bleed. At some point, pain stops being a reason and becomes a responsibility. That's the moment most people turn back, because responsibility means ownership. Ownership means no more victims. No more villains to point at, just you, and what you decide to become. I stood there looking at the version of myself that wanted rest, the version that said, enough, you've suffered enough. And I looked at the version of myself that wanted power, the one that whispered, not yet. That voice didn't promise happiness, it promised control. It didn't offer peace, it offered strength. And I understood something dark and beautiful. This life was never meant to be gentle with me. So why should I be gentle with it? I didn't choose the light. I chose resolve, the kind that doesn't need motivation, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that wakes up every day and says, this again and again and again. No applause, no validation, just discipline. I didn't celebrate the decision. There was nothing to celebrate. Choosing to conquer meant accepting loss, loss of comfort, loss of approval, loss of the fantasy that someone would save me. It meant becoming someone who does not ask for permission, someone who doesn't explain their hunger, someone who doesn't need to be understood. Because here's the truth, understanding is overrated. Results speak louder. I chose to become dangerous, not loud, not reckless, controlled, focused, unemotional in moments where emotion used to rule me. I chose standards over feelings. I chose structure over sympathy. I chose to carry my pain instead of asking others to carry it for me. And the world didn't change after that decision. It didn't bow, it didn't notice, but I changed, and that's all that mattered. Because once the decision is made, everything else becomes execution. No more questioning if it's worth it, no more bargaining with fear. Fear doesn't disappear, it just loses its authority. I stopped asking, what if I fail? And started asking, what if I don't try? That question terrified me more. I accepted that conquering wouldn't make me liked. It would make me alone, and I was ready for that, because loneliness with direction is better than belonging without purpose. I didn't choose to be the hero. Heroes need approval. I chose to be effective. I chose to be relentless. I chose to be the one who keeps moving long after motivation dies. That's when I felt it. Not joy, not excitement. Something heavier, something solid. Resolve. The kind that doesn't shake. The kind that doesn't need reassurance. The kind that says, no matter what happens next, I am not collapsing. Let the world misunderstand me. Let them call me cold. Let them say I changed. I did. I became someone who finishes, someone who doesn't fold under pressure, someone who doesn't wait for the right mood to do what must be done. This wasn't a rebirth. It was a decision, a line drawn in silence, a promise made with no witnesses. From that moment forward, there was no going back to the person who hoped things would get easier. I became the person who gets harder, So if you're standing at that same crossroad, if you feel that quiet moment pressing on your chest, listen carefully. No one will clap for you. No one will notice when you decide. But that decision will echo through everything you do next. Collapse is always available. It's comfortable. It's familiar. But conquering demands everything. And gives you something rare in return, self-respect. I didn't choose the light. I chose resolve. And once that choice is made, the rest is inevitable. The death of the old self, that version of me, died, not quietly, not peacefully. It didn't drift away in sleep or fade with time. It burned. I remember the moment I felt it slipping. The weight I had been carrying that wasn't mine, the need to be understood, the hunger for approval, the quiet hope that if I stayed good, stayed soft, stayed small, someone would finally choose me. That hope was poison. That version of me died. I didn't kill it with anger, I killed it with clarity. I saw myself standing there, stripped down to the truth. Every time I swallowed my words to keep the peace. Every time I bent so others could stand taller. Every time I mistook patience for virtue and silence for strength. Fear had been wearing my face. Softness had been speaking in my voice. And I let it. I told myself it was kindness. I told myself it was maturity. I told myself it made me better than them. But it made me smaller. That version of me died. I stopped asking why they didn't see my value. I stopped explaining myself to people who had already decided who I was. I stopped shrinking my fire so others wouldn't feel burned. I realized something that night, something brutal, something final. The world does not reward purity. It tests it. It uses it. It drains it dry and calls it weak. And I had been bleeding for everyone. Fear was never protecting me. It was negotiating my surrender. That version of me died. I felt it like skin peeling away, like standing too close to a flame and realizing you can't step back. The heat was unbearable because transformation is never gentle. I watched old habits scream for survival, the urge to apologize for existing, the reflex to explain my pain so it could be validated, the instinct to seek permission before becoming who I already was. I let them burn. I let the fear burn. I let the softness burn. I let the need for approval scream until it had no voice left. That version of me died. And listen to me when I say this, death like that doesn't come with music. There's no applause, no moment where the clouds part and light pours in. There is only silence, a terrifying silence. Because when the old self dies, you stand naked in the aftermath. No excuses, no masks, no stories to hide behind, just you. And for the first time, I didn't look away. I saw how much of my life had been shaped by fear of rejection. How many decisions weren't choices, but compromises. How often I chose comfort over truth. I wasn't weak. I was trained to be harmless. That version of me died. I stopped calling my instincts too much. I stopped apologizing for intensity. I stopped dulling my edges so others could feel safe around me. I realized something else, something dangerous. The traits they tried to suppress were the same traits that could not be controlled. My anger wasn't a flaw, it was energy without direction. My defiance wasn't rebellion, it was self-respect waking up. My darkness wasn't corruption, it was depth they were afraid to face. That version of me died. I burned the identity they handed me. The labels, the expectations, the silent rules about how loud I was allowed to be, how ambitious, how unapologetic. I stopped asking, am I allowed? And started asking, what happens if I don't care? Fear begged me to stay. It reminded me of everything I could lose: approval, belonging, safety. I looked at it and finally told the truth. I already lost those things trying to keep you. That version of me died. I stepped into the fire willingly because staying the same was a slower death. I felt something shift inside me, a hardening, a sharpening, not cruelty, precision. I no longer needed to be liked. I needed to be aligned. Aligned with my truth. Aligned with my hunger. Aligned with the version of me that could survive alone if necessary. That version of me died. And in its place, something quieter appeared, not louder, not angry or colder. A resolve that didn't need to announce itself, a discipline that didn't ask for motivation, a self-respect that didn't beg for recognition. I stopped explaining my boundaries. I enforced them. I stopped proving my worth. I embodied it. I stopped waiting for permission. I took ownership. That version of me died. I shed the illusion that being good would save me, that being patient would protect me, that being understanding would be returned. The world doesn't meet you with fairness, it meets you with pressure, and pressure reveals truth. That version of me died. I became ruthless with my energy, selective with my trust, unapologetic with my ambition. Not because I hated people, but because I finally loved myself enough to stop sacrificing. I stopped offering explanations to those committed to misunderstanding me. I stopped chasing closure from people who benefited from my confusion. I let the door close. That version of me died. I didn't rise from the ashes glowing. I rose hardened, scarred, clear. Fire doesn't just destroy, it purifies, and what survived was real. No more softness mistaken for weakness. No more fear dressed up as humility. No more living for approval that never came. That version of me died. And if you're listening to this, if something in you is tightening right now, if you feel resistance rising, good. That's the old self fighting to survive. Ask yourself something. How much of who you are is just who you had to become to be accepted? How much have you buried just to be tolerated? Look at the skin you're wearing. Does it fit? Or is it burning? Because the fire is already there. And sooner or later you'll have to choose. Cling to what's familiar or step into what's true. I made my choice. That version of me died, and I did not mourn it. Motivation is a lie. I learned that the hard way because motivation is a feeling, and feelings are unreliable. They show up when life is easy. They disappear when life gets heavy. I waited for motivation once. I waited for the fire, the spark, the sudden surge of hope. It never came. What came instead was silence. Cold mornings, long nights, a body that didn't want to move, a mind that wanted to quit. That's when I understood the truth no one wants to hear. If you need motivation to act, you will never be consistent. If you need emotion to move, you will always stop when it hurts. So I stopped chasing motivation, and I built something colder. Discipline, not the pretty kind, not the Instagram kind, not the feel-inspired kind. The kind that doesn't care how you feel. The kind that shows up even when you hate yourself. The kind that works in silence. I didn't heal, I hardened. I stopped asking myself, do I feel like it? I started asking, does it need to be done? And most days the answer was yes. I learned that pain doesn't disappear when you wait. It disappears when you outwork it, when you exhaust it, when you bury it under repetition. Routine became my religion. Same wake up, same work, same grind, same refusal to negotiate with weakness. No speeches, no hype, no cheering crowd, just repetition again and again and again. I didn't need to believe in myself. I just needed to show up because belief fluctuates. Discipline does not. There were days I felt empty, so I moved anyway. There were days I felt angry, so I focused harder. There were days I felt nothing at all, so I executed the plan without emotion. That's when something changed. The chaos inside me started to quiet, not because I was happier, but because I was busier building. Feelings lost their power when they stopped deciding my actions. I realized something dangerous. Emotion makes you human. Discipline makes you unstoppable. The world tells you to listen to your feelings. The world is lying to you. Feelings are weather. They change without warning. They don't care about your future. Structure does. So I built structure like armor. I woke up at the same time even when my mind begged me not to. I worked when I was tired. I trained when I was angry. I learned when I was bored. Not because I wanted to, because I said I would. Every promise kept to myself added weight to my spine. Every excuse rejected made my voice stronger. I stopped needing validation, stopped explaining, stopped hoping someone would notice. This wasn't about being seen, this was about becoming dangerous in silence. Motivation wants applause, discipline wants results. Motivation asks, how do you feel? Discipline asks, what's next? And I chose what lasts. I didn't heal my wounds by talking about them. I healed them by building a life that no longer revolved around them. Pain became fuel. Anger became focus. Loneliness became time. I stopped romanticizing struggle, stopped crying about fairness, stopped asking why it was so hard. Hard became normal, and once hard becomes normal, nothing can scare you anymore. I learned to respect the days that felt heavy, because those were the days that built me. Anyone can move when they feel inspired. Only the disciplined move when they feel nothing. That's the difference, that's the line, and once you cross it, there is no going back. You stop being fragile, you stop being reactive. You stop being controlled by mood and memory, you become precise. I didn't need motivation telling me I was special. I needed discipline reminding me I wasn't finished, so I repeated the process. Same hours, same effort, same silence. Over time, the old noise faded. The doubt got quieter. The fear lost its teeth. The past stopped interrupting my future. Not because I forgave it, but because I outgrew it. Discipline doesn't care about your story, it only cares about your output, and that's why it works. I didn't become softer, I became sharper. I didn't become kinder to my weakness. I became intolerant of it, because weakness doesn't need comfort, it needs to be challenged. And every day I showed up without motivation, I proved something to myself. I don't need to feel ready. I don't need to feel confident. I don't need to feel strong. I just need to act. That's power. Quiet power, uncelebrated power, relentless power, the kind that doesn't announce itself, the kind that arrives already prepared. So if you're waiting for motivation, stop. If you're waiting to feel better, stop. If you're waiting for the fire, stop. Build structure, build habits, build standards. Let discipline carry you when emotion fails, because emotion will fail. And when it does, discipline will still be there. Cold, patient, unbreakable. I didn't heal, I hardened. And nothing that breaks others gets to control me anymore. I stopped announcing my intentions. I learned that noise attracts parasites. I learned that applause weakens the hands that are supposed to be working. So I went quiet. No speeches, no updates, no promises whispered into empty rooms. I let them think I disappeared. Silence became my shield. Because when you build in public, you build for approval. And when you build for approval, you hand strangers the blueprint to your soul. I chose another way. I chose to build where no one clapped, where no one checked on me, where no one believed anything was happening at all. That's where real power grows, in silence. I watched the world celebrate loud ambition. I watched them reward talkers, not doers. I watched people announce goals they never planned to bleed for. And I learned something cold. The most dangerous man in the room is the one no one is watching. So I let them look past me. Let them underestimate the quiet one. Let them mock the absence of noise. Let them mistake silence for weakness. They always do. While they were distracted by validation, I was perfecting repetition. While they were chasing motivation, I was building obedience to routine, because motivation lies. Motivation shows up when it feels like it. Discipline shows up whether you're ready or not, and I stopped negotiating with my feelings. I didn't ask myself if I wanted to work. I didn't wait to feel inspired. I didn't seek permission from my mood. I acted again and again and again. No witnesses, no rewards, no applause, just execution. This is where villains are made, not in explosions, not in speeches, but in boring, merciless consistency. I trained when no one was watching. I learned when no one cared. I suffered where no one could see it. And that suffering didn't break me, it sharpened me. Every quiet morning was a brick. Every lonely night was a weapon forged. Every ignored effort was strength deposited where no one could steal it. I didn't need validation anymore. Validation is a leash. The moment you crave it, you belong to the crowd. And I refused to belong to anything that needed approval to function. I became my own judge, harsh, unforgiving, precise. I stopped celebrating small wins publicly. I stopped explaining myself. I stopped defending my pace, because power doesn't explain. Power arrives finished. They didn't see the sacrifices. They didn't see the discipline. They didn't see the isolation. Good. Let mystery protect the work. Let silence hide the blueprint. Because when people don't know what you're building, they can't sabotage it. And they will try. They always try. That's why I learned to love obscurity. Obscurity is freedom. In obscurity, you can fail without being labeled. You can rebuild without being questioned. You can transform without being interrupted. I wasn't hiding. I was incubating. I was stripping emotion out of the process. No excitement, no despair, just rules. Rules that didn't care how I felt. Wake up, execute, improve, repeat. T-H-A-T Hindi, he kainus Hindi, he nainus. That rhythm became my religion, not faith, not hope, not belief. Process, cold, unemotional, relentless, and something strange happened. The more silent I became, the louder my results spoke. Strength appeared without announcement. Confidence arrived without permission. Control settled in quietly like a blade sliding into a sheath. I didn't become nicer, I became clearer. I didn't become louder, I became inevitable. This is villain discipline. The kind that doesn't seek forgiveness. The kind that doesn't ask to be understood. The kind that doesn't need to be loved, only respected. And respect is earned in silence. So if you're waiting to be seen before you start, you're already behind. If you need applause to continue, you will quit when the room goes quiet. But if you can work unseen, if you can suffer unacknowledged, if you can improve without witnesses, you become untouchable. Look at yourself. Look at what you're building when no one is watching. That's the real you. That's the version they should be afraid of. Because one day, without warning, the silence will break. And when it does, they won't hear footsteps. They'll feel impact. And they'll wonder when it happened. It already did. In the quiet, in the discipline, in the dark. While they were talking, I was becoming. Becoming unrecognizable, they say people change. They say time softens edges. They say pain fades. They lied. What really happens is quieter, colder, more terrifying. You don't explode. You don't announce it. You don't post a before and after. You disappear slowly inside yourself. At first, you still feel everything, too much. Every word cuts, every look weighs, every silence screams. Then one day, the noise lowers, not because the world got kinder, but because something inside you shut a door. That's when it begins. You stop explaining yourself. You stop defending your intentions. You stop hoping people will finally understand. You realize understanding was never the goal. Control was, and you take it back. The anger doesn't vanish, it condenses. The sadness doesn't leave, it sharpens. The fear doesn't die, it learns obedience. You don't feel less, you feel contained. That's when they start noticing. They say your name and don't get the reaction they expect. They provoke and hit silence. They insult and meet a calm stare that doesn't blink. They feel it before they see it, because energy changes first. You no longer leak emotion, no nervous laughter, no over-explaining, no desperate warmth. Your presence becomes still, heavy, unmoved. Calm replaces chaos, not peaceful calm, controlled calm, the kind that unsettles rooms. You listen more than you speak. You watch patterns repeat. You store information instead of feelings. You realize emotion was never the problem. Lack of discipline was. So you cut the excess. Not dramatically, not publicly, quietly. You stop reacting on impulse. Stop chasing closure. Stop needing outcomes to soothe your ego. You let things be unfinished. Unanswered messages, uncorrected assumptions, unresolved misunderstandings. And in that silence, something dangerous grows. Detachment, not apathy. Precision. You stop bleeding for people who wouldn't notice the stain. You stop offering softness to hands that only know how to squeeze. You learn the difference between kindness and self-betrayal. You choose the latter never again. Your face changes, not physically, energetically. Less expression, more intention. Your eyes don't ask anymore. They measure. People sense it. They tell you you're different, colder, distant. They say you've changed like it's an accusation. You don't deny it because they're right. The version of you they knew was accessible, predictable, exhausted. That version needed approval to breathe. That version is gone. That version didn't survive. Now you move without urgency, without apology, without seeking permission to exist. You don't rush, you don't chase, you don't beg time to slow down. You let others reveal themselves while you stay unreadable. That's when the power shifts. They try harder, talk louder, push boundaries, and you don't flinch. Because chaos no longer lives inside you. It used to roar, now it kneels. You replaced emotional volatility with structure, impulse with ritual, reaction with restraint. Your days are boring to outsiders, repetitive, uncelebrated, and that's why they work. While others burn energy performing identity, you build one. While they explain, you execute. While they doubt, you repeat. No applause, no witnesses, just quiet accumulation, strength that doesn't need to announce itself. You stop feeling guilty for not caring. You stop forcing empathy where it's not reciprocated. You stop confusing loyalty with tolerance. Your standards rise, your circle shrinks. Silence deepens. People think they lost access to you. They never had it. They had proximity to a version of you that no longer exists. And when they finally see results, when the discipline shows in your posture, when the confidence settles into your voice, when the restraint becomes unmistakable, they connect dots too late. They realize the distance wasn't accidental. It was intentional. You didn't drift away. You withdrew. You built something behind closed doors, and now you are unrecognizable. Not louder, not crueler, just harder to move, harder to manipulate, harder to read, harder to break. You don't need to prove it. You're calmed as that for you, because calm is terrifying when it comes from someone who used to be chaos. And if you're listening to this, really listening, look at yourself. Look at how little you react now. Look at how much you endure without comment. Look at how you've stopped asking to be understood. Do you see loss, or do you see evolution? They missed the old you because the old you was useful to them. This version answers only to purpose, and purpose doesn't explain itself, it moves, silently. 16. When pain became fuel, pain used to be a warning, a signal to retreat, a message screaming, stop. Pain used to own me. Every ache was a command, every loss was a verdict, every scar felt like a sentence carved into my future. Pain said, you're not built for this. Pain said, turn back. Pain said, this is where you quit. And for a long time, I listened. I treated pain like an enemy, like something to escape, like proof that I was failing, but pain never left. It waited, patient, persistent. It followed me into every attempt at becoming more. It showed up when I tried to stand taller, when I tried to want more, when I tried to believe. Pain didn't disappear when I played small. It didn't soften when I obeyed. It didn't vanish when I stayed quiet. That's when I understood something brutal. Pain wasn't punishment. Pain was payment, the price of existing, the cost of movement, the toll for refusing to rot in place. So I stopped running, I stopped flinching, I stopped begging pain to leave me alone. Instead, I turned around and faced it. Look at it closely. Pain isn't chaos, it's information. Pain isn't random, it's precise. It shows you where you're weak, where you're exposed, where you've been lying to yourself. Pain points to the work, and I realized something that changed everything. Pain doesn't control you, your reaction does. Pain doesn't break you, your fear of it does. Pain doesn't ruin lives, avoidance does. So I stopped fearing it. I stopped asking, how do I make this stop? And started asking, how do I use this? That question rewired me. Every rejection became pressure. Every failure became friction. Every insult became heat. And heat does one of two things. It melts you, or it hardens you. I chose hard. I let pain sharpen me. I let it strip away excuses, strip away softness, strip away the illusion that comfort was ever coming. Pain taught me discipline, because when you're hurting, motivation lies to you. Motivation whispers comfort, discipline whispers direction. Pain forced me into structure. When emotion screamed, routine answered. When doubt shouted, repetition replied. When weakness begged, consistency refused. Pain stopped being an emergency. It became background noise, a hum beneath my actions. A reminder that I was still moving, still building, still alive. I didn't numb it, I mastered it. I learned how to carry pain without letting it spill into my decisions, how to feel it without letting it steer, how to acknowledge it without obeying it. Pain tried to rush me, I slowed down. Pain tried to make me reactive, I became precise. Pain tried to turn me bitter, I turned cold, cold enough to think. Cold enough to plan, cold enough to execute without drama, and something terrifying happened. The things that used to destroy me stopped working. The insults didn't hit as hard, the setbacks didn't derail me, the loneliness didn't scare me because pain was no longer a signal of danger. It was proof of engagement, proof that I was in the arena, proof that I was doing something that mattered. I stopped asking the world to be gentle. I stopped demanding fairness. I stopped expecting mercy. Pain cured me of entitlement. It taught me self-reliance. No one was coming to ease it. No system was designed to reduce it. No authority was invested in carrying it for me. So I carried it myself. And in carrying it, I got stronger, not louder, not angrier, stronger. Pain stopped being emotional. It became mechanical. Input, processing, output, pain in, control out, pain in, focus out, pain in, results out. That's when people noticed the change. They couldn't explain it. They said I was different, distant, unreachable. They felt the shift before they saw the results. Because pain had burned away my need to be understood, burned away my need for approval, burned away my habit of explaining myself to people who never listened. Pain simplified me. Less emotion, more execution, less reaction, more intention, less noise, more power. And here's the truth they don't want you to learn. Pain is unlimited. It never runs out. So if pain can be infinite, then so can your fuel. While others break under it, you can run on it. While others collapse from it, you can convert it. While others curse it, you can command it. Pain is the most reliable resource you will ever have. It shows up every day. It never flakes. It never forgets your address. So I stopped trying to escape hell. I studied it. I learned its rules, its patterns, its weaknesses. And one day, without ceremony, without applause, without witnesses, something flipped. Pain didn't scare me anymore. Pain didn't slow me anymore. Pain worked for me. I walked through what used to burn me. I stayed calm where I used to panic. I kept moving where I used to collapse, and I smiled not from joy but from clarity because I finally understood. Hell was never my enemy, it was my forge. It didn't exist to destroy me. It existed to shape me, and once I stopped screaming in the fire, once I stopped begging for relief, once I stopped asking why me, I became the thing pain couldn't control. Hell stopped burning me. I started burning it. Wearing the villain title, they called me a villain long before I accepted it. They whispered it first. Then they said it louder. Then they waited for me to flinch. I didn't, because I learned something they never did. A label only hurts when you try to peel it off. A name only chains you when you beg to be renamed. I stopped explaining. I stopped defending. I stopped asking for permission to exist as I am. Listen to me carefully. Hatred is not my problem. Fear is not my burden. Their discomfort is not my responsibility. They wanted apologies, I gave them silence. They wanted remorse, I gave them results. They wanted me smaller, I became heavier than their opinions could carry. They call you cold when you stop bleeding in public. They call you cruel when you stop sacrificing yourself. They call you a villain when you refuse to stay controllable. So I wore it, not like a curse, like armor. Say it again. Villain, say it slower, villain. Do you hear how powerless it sounds once I stop running from it? I am not here to be liked. I am not here to be understood. I am not here to make them comfortable. I am here to be effective. They don't hate you because you're wrong. They hate you because you're unmoved, because you no longer beg for approval, because you don't collapse when they withdraw affection. Hatred is proof of independence. Resistance is confirmation of strength. I watched them grow nervous when I stopped reacting. I watched them get louder when I got quieter. I watched them scramble when I didn't explain myself. That's when I knew. The villain title was never an insult. It was a confession. It meant I was no longer predictable, no longer programmable, no longer owned. So go ahead, misunderstand me. Paint me dark, paint me dangerous, paint me wrong. I will not correct the story. I will outgrow it. You see, power doesn't argue. Power doesn't justify. Power doesn't kneel in conversations it has already outgrown. Power moves, power builds, power waits. And while they are busy debating my character, I am shaping my future. Look at yourself. Look at how much of your life you wasted trying to be palatable, trying to be chosen, trying to be forgiven for wanting more. They never planned to accept you. They planned to manage you. So when you stopped shrinking, they panicked. When you stopped explaining, they labeled. When you stopped caring, they named you villain. Good. Villains don't ask for seats at tables. They build their own rooms. Villains don't seek consensus. They enforce standards. Villains don't apologize for surviving. They master it. I am not here to save them from their fear. I am not here to soften myself so they can digest me. I am not here to dilute my edge to earn applause. I am here to become undeniable. Let them hate. Let them talk. Let them tremble behind opinions they mistake for power. I know who I am now. I am the one who didn't break when abandonment showed its teeth. I am the one who learned discipline when comfort disappeared. I am the one who chose control over chaos. And yes, I am the villain in their story, because every system calls the ungovernable a threat. Every cage calls the escaped one dangerous. Every weak structure labels strength as evil, so wear it. The title, the name, the shadow they cast on you, wear it without shame, without apology, without explanation. Because the moment you stop defending yourself is the moment they lose control. And that silence, that calm, that unbothered stare, that is dominance. I don't need redemption arcs. I don't need approval arcs. I don't need to be loved by people who only respect obedience. I chose myself. And that choice changed everything. Call me what you want. I've already become what you fear, and I'm just getting started. Standing alone, unbroken, I stand alone, not because I was chosen. Not because I was given a crown, not because the world welcomed me. I stand alone because I had no other choice. The weight of survival falls on no one else. No savior arrives, no hand steadies you, no whisper tells you that you're safe. I learned to be my own strength, my own shield, my own foundation. Independence is a weapon, a silent force that strikes before it is seen. I move without apology, I act without consent, I exist without explanation. I am unchained, no leash of hope. No tether of fear, no rope of expectation. The world wanted me tethered. It wanted me leaning, it wanted me depending, it wanted me fragile. I refused. I built my stability from nothing, from the ruins of every betrayal, from the echoes of every absence, from the silence that everyone else feared. I am steady, immovable, unbroken. They confuse stability with complacency. They mistake patience for weakness. They believe presence equals subordination. They are wrong. I do not move for applause. I do not act for approval. I do not bend for expectation. I stand. And my standing alone is proof that I survived, proof that I thrived, proof that I am more than their measure. Independence is not loneliness. It is clarity. It is precision. It is the knowledge that no one can shake your foundation because you built it yourself. I learned to rely on no one, to expect nothing, to fear nothing. I carry my own stability like a blade, sharp, balanced, deadly. Every step I take echoes certainty. Every breath I draw resonates control. Every silence I hold is louder than their noise. They watched me falter. They expected me to stumble. They whispered, "Alone he cannot survive." They were wrong. I do not stumble. I do not falter. I do not bend. I am my own law. I am my own order. I am the force that moves without interference. Standing alone, I am untouchable. I do not need reassurance. I do not need comfort. I do not need permission. Independence is my domain. It is my sovereignty. It is my power. They confuse dependence with safety. They mistake connection for control. They believe stability is given. I know better. Stability is forged. It is earned. It is conquered. I learned to hold myself upright, to balance in chaos, to remain unwavering when everything around me crumbles. I do not lean on walls. I do not grasp for hands. I do not need a net. I am the net. I am the anchor. I am the storm contained within my own will. They see solitude and think fear. They see isolation and think weakness. They are blind. I stand alone, and in that standing I am stronger than any alliance, sharper than any weapon, faster than any reaction. I am not a man bound by society. I am not a soul tethered to expectation. I am a force unclaimed, untamed, unstoppable. Every step I take echoes authority. Every glance I give radiates command. Every silence I hold resonates dominance. I do not fight for survival. I do not fight to exist. I fight to define the world around me, and I define it from my position. Alone, unbroken, the world whispers, it wonders, it trembles. Because a man who relies on nothing cannot be manipulated, cannot be controlled, cannot be destroyed. I do not seek allies. I do not seek love. I do not seek approval. I have all I need. My mind, my strength, my will, and that is enough. I am independent, I am untethered, I am sovereign. Alone, I am complete. Unbroken, I am unstoppable. No leash binds me, no fear guides me, no expectation limits me. I am the apex of my own making. I am the law of my existence. I am the master of my fate. Standing alone, I am the storm they never saw coming. The shadow that moves before their footsteps. The power that defines the world they cannot comprehend. I am unshakable. I am unwavering. I am the consequence of every chain I refuse to wear. I do not stumble, I do not beg, I do not kneel, I rise, alone, unbroken, and they watch and they learn, because the strongest do not ask for guidance. The strongest do not follow, the strongest do not wait. I am the strongest, I am the independent, I am unbroken. And standing alone I am enough, I am everything, I am the force the world must reckon with. Not for my approval, not for my mercy, but because I exist. I endure, I dominate. Alone I am unstoppable. Unbroken I am immortal. I am the proof, the example, the inevitability. I stand alone and I will remain forever. Final declaration, born in hell, forged in fire. I was born in hell, not in comfort, not in warmth, not in mercy. I was born in the ashes of cruelty, in the smoke of betrayal, in the fire of indifference. They thought fire would burn me. They thought darkness would swallow me. They thought pain would break me. They were wrong. I was forged in fire, hammered by suffering, shaped by every blow I never deserved, every scream that went unheard, every tear that fell unseen. I am not weak, I am not broken. I am the proof that fire does not destroy, it transforms. Let them hate, let them fear, let them remember. Every wound I carried became strength. Every scar etched into my soul became armor. Every whisper of doubt became a roar of certainty. I walked through this world unshaken, unrelenting, unbroken. They wanted me small. They wanted me silent. They wanted me lost. They failed. I am loud. I am vast. I am inevitable. Let them hate. Let them fear. Let them remember. The chains that bound me, I shattered them. The walls that caged me, I tore them down. The voices that mocked me, I silenced them forever. I am no one's puppet. I am no one's creation. I am the architect of my own existence. Let them hate. Let them fear. Let them remember. The world expects submission. It expects obedience. It expects compromise. I offer none. I yield nothing. I compromise nothing. I am fire. I am storm. I am the shadow that moves before their footsteps, the force they cannot anticipate, the name they will never forget. Let them hate. Let them fear. Let them remember. I have walked through hell. I have dined with pain. I have conversed with betrayal. I came back stronger, sharper, unstoppable. Let them hate. Let them fear. Let them remember. I do not seek revenge. I do not beg for justice. I do not need their approval. I am the reckoning. I am the consequence. I am the inevitability. Let them hate. Let them fear. Let them remember. I do not shout my arrival. I do not demand recognition. I do not perform for their eyes. I am present. I am constant. I am final. Let them hate. Let them fear. Let them remember. I am the storm that was born in fire. I am the shadow that was carved in darkness. I am the fury that was tempered by pain. I am alive not because they allowed it, not because they forgave it, not because they noticed. I am alive because I decided to be, because I refused to fall, because I refused to kneel. Let them hate, let them fear, let them remember. I am the echo of every insult that tried to break me, the shadow of every hand that tried to stop me, the fury of every moment they wished I would disappear. I rise, always, again, forever. Let them hate, let them fear, let them remember. This is my declaration. Not a threat, not a plea, not a warning. This is truth, quiet, unyielding, absolute. I exist, I endure, I dominate. Let them hate, let them fear, let them remember. I am not returning, I am here, I am permanent. I am inevitable, born in hell, forged in fire. I am whole, I am final. Let them hate, let them fear, let them remember. I am the end, I am the law, I am the silence that follows their screams. And now I remain, forever. Epilogue, the warning, listen carefully. Not because I am loud, but because I am calm. This is not a threat. Threats are made by the uncertain, by those who still need permission, by those who hope fear will do the work for them. I don't hope, I don't threaten, I state what is. This is a truth. There was a time when the world spoke over me, when it decided who I was allowed to be, when it mistook my silence for weakness, my patience for submission, my restraint for fear. That misunderstanding was their comfort. It will not be their future. I did not rise by noise. I did not arrive by announcement. I didn't kick the door open. I waited, I learned, I hardened. You don't hear the mountain growing. You don't hear the ocean deepen. You only notice when it's already too late to argue with gravity. This is not revenge. Revenge is emotional, messy, loud. This is alignment. This is consequence. This is what happens when pressure meets patience. I don't need to be angry. Anger leaks energy. I conserve mine. I don't need applause. Applause fades. Power remains. I don't need understanding. Understanding is optional. Reality is not. Look at the pattern, not the moment. I didn't win once. I endured consistently. I didn't break through luck. I built through discipline. While others searched for comfort, I studied discomfort. While others numbed pain, I listened to it. While others asked for fairness, I adapted to truth. That's the difference. Not talent, not fate, not privilege. Adaptation. I learned early that no one was coming. That rescue is a fantasy sold to the fragile. That survival is a solo act, so I became sufficient, then capable, then dangerous, not in chaos, but in control. Understand this clearly, I don't need to destroy anything. Time does that for me. I don't need to chase anyone. Those who matter eventually arrive at the same crossroads. I don't need to prove myself. Proof is demanded by those who doubt. I've already crossed that threshold. This is not dominance by force. It is dominance by position. I am steady where others panic, silent where others shout, unmoved where others beg. That is not cruelty, that is clarity, and clarity is terrifying to those who live in denial. I don't hate the world. Hate requires investment. I simply see it accurately. I see the games, the masks, the cycles, and I chose not to play. I chose to build something that doesn't need validation from the crowd. So if this feels like a warning to you, understand it's not aimed. It's not personal, it's structural. This is how things shift when someone refuses to collapse. This is how balance changes when one person decides they will not be ruled by fear, memory, or expectation. You don't have to like it. You don't have to agree. You only have to acknowledge it. Because from this point forward, nothing around me stays accidental. Every move is deliberate. Every silence is chosen. Every boundary is final. This isn't aggression. It's containment, not rage. Resolution, not chaos. Order. And once you recognize that difference, you'll understand why this cannot be undone. Why this does not fade. Why this does not retreat. I don't escalate. I stabilize. I don't react. I remain. And remaining when forged correctly outlasts everything. So remember this moment, not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Not because it was loud, but because it was honest. Not because it promised destruction, but because it explained inevitability. I was born in hell. And I survived it. That's why I can't be stopped. The birth of the villain, it never begins with anger. That is the lie people tell themselves because anger is loud and this beginning is quiet, almost invisible. It starts in moments so small they barely register as pain. A favor given without hesitation. A boundary gently explained. A truth spoken softly, hoping it will be respected. And each time something is taken, not all at once, slowly, carefully. Until one day you look back and realize you have been paying for your kindness with pieces of yourself. In the beginning, you believed being good was enough. You believed effort would be noticed, intentions would be understood, and patience would eventually be rewarded. You learned to listen more than you spoke, to give the benefit of the doubt, to smooth conflicts instead of winning them. You told yourself that strength meant restraint, that maturity meant swallowing discomfort so others could feel comfortable. And for a while this belief felt noble. It felt clean. It felt right. But nobility has a cost when it is offered to people who see it as weakness. The first betrayal rarely looks like betrayal. It looks like a joke made at your expense, laughed off because you didn't want to seem sensitive. It looks like a promise broken, explained away with excuses you chose to understand. It looks like your time being taken for granted because you never complained when it was wasted. Each incident alone feels harmless. Together they form a pattern, a quiet education, a lesson you never agreed to learn. You begin to notice how quickly people adjust to your generosity, how naturally they expect it, how surprised they are the first time you hesitate. The first time you say no, their faces change. Confusion first, then irritation, as if you violated an unspoken contract, as if your kindness was never a gift, only a service they assumed would always be available. That is when the erosion begins. You start editing yourself. You soften your words so no one feels challenged. You shrink your needs so no one feels burdened. You apologize for emotions that were justified, for questions that were reasonable, for boundaries that should have been obvious. Somewhere along the way, you learn that peace, as it is offered to you, requires your silence. And silence, when it is demanded, is not peace at all. They call you nice, but what they mean is manageable. The exhaustion doesn't arrive dramatically. It settles in your bones, a heaviness you carry even when nothing is happening. You feel it when you wake up already tired, when you replay conversations in your head, wondering how you could have said things differently, softer, better. When you feel responsible not just for your actions, but for everyone else's reactions. You start to realize that being good has become a full-time job with no rest and no protection. And still you try. Because walking away feels like failure, because standing firm feels like cruelty, because you were taught that endurance is virtue and self-sacrifice is strength. You were never taught to ask who benefits from that belief. Then comes the moment that doesn't look like a turning point, but is. It is a small dismissal, a boundary ignored one too many times, a look of annoyance when you finally speak up, a subtle punishment for asserting yourself. And in that moment, something inside you goes quiet, not angry, not explosive, just clear. You understand without needing to argue it that your kindness was never misunderstood. It was understood perfectly. That is why it was exploited. This realization hurts more than rage ever could, because rage implies injustice. This feels like clarity. You see the pattern laid out in front of you, undeniable. The more you gave, the more was taken. The more patient you were, the more careless they became. The more forgiving you acted, the more entitled they felt. Goodness did not bring safety. It brought access, and society encourages this trade. You are praised for being agreeable, for being flexible, for being easy to work with, easy to live with, easy to overlook. You are told that real strength doesn't need recognition, that real power is quiet, that humility means accepting less without complaint. Slowly, subtly, you are trained to disappear just enough to make others comfortable. And when you resist, even slightly, the language changes. You are no longer kind. You are difficult, no longer patient. You are cold, no longer generous. You are selfish. This is where the word villain first appears, not spoken aloud but implied, in tone, in distance, in the way people begin to treat you differently the moment you stop overextending. You haven't changed yet, not really. You've only stopped shrinking, and already that is enough to make you dangerous. The exhaustion reaches a point where maintaining the old version of yourself feels heavier than becoming someone new. You realize you are tired of proving your intentions, tired of explaining your boundaries, tired of absorbing damage quietly so others don't feel uncomfortable confronting their own behavior. You understand, finally, that the rules you were playing by were never designed to protect you. They were designed to contain you. And in that understanding, something irreversible happens. You don't decide to become the villain. You simply stop protecting a system that was never protecting you. You stop volunteering to be misunderstood. You stop performing goodness for people who only valued the performance. The mask doesn't fall dramatically. It is removed calmly, almost gently. And beneath it is not cruelty, but resolve. This is the birth, not of malice, but of refusal. The realization settles in slowly, but it changes everything. Playing nice was never safety. It was submission dressed up as virtue. And now that you see it, you can never unsee it. The refusal does not announce itself. It doesn't demand attention or validation. It simply exists steady and unmoving, like a door that no longer opens no matter how politely someone knocks. At first, even you are surprised by it. You expect guilt to flood in, the familiar instinct to explain, to soften, to fix. But instead there is a strange calm, a quiet relief. As if your body recognizes this stance before your mind fully understands it. People feel the shift before they can name it. Conversations change. The pauses stretch longer. Your silence, once read as agreement, now lands differently. You are no longer rushing to fill space, to reassure, to make things easier. And in that absence, others begin to reveal how much they depended on your compliance, how uncomfortable they are without your emotional labor smoothing every edge. Some respond with confusion. They ask if you're okay, but not really. They are asking if you are still controllable. Others respond with irritation masked as concern. They suggest you've changed, that you're colder, harder, less fun. The irony is sharp. The moment you protect yourself, you are accused of becoming someone else, as if the version of you that endured quietly was the only acceptable one. This is where doubt tries to creep back in. You wonder if you are overreacting, if you are being unfair. If holding the line makes you the problem, old habits don't die easily. They whisper that harmony is more important than honesty, that peace is worth any price. But now those whispers sound tired, outdated. You've lived their consequences. You know what they cost. You start noticing things you once ignored. How often your needs were postponed indefinitely. How often your discomfort was treated as an inconvenience. How rarely anyone checked whether you were okay as long as you were useful. These observations don't enrage you. They sober you. They strip away illusion. The villain, you realize, is not someone who harms others without reason. The villain is simply the one who stops absorbing harm quietly. There is a grief that comes with this awareness. A mourning for the person you were, the one who believed understanding could fix everything. The one who thought if they just explained themselves clearly enough, patiently enough, the world would meet them halfway. Letting go of that belief feels like letting go of innocence, because innocence is not ignorance, it is trust. And trust, once broken repeatedly, does not regenerate the same way. You feel this loss most sharply in moments of restraint, when you choose not to respond, not to justify, not to rescue someone from the discomfort of your boundaries. These moments feel unnatural at first, like learning to walk with a different balance. But with each one, your center of gravity shifts. You are no longer leaning outward, bracing yourself against others' expectations. You are standing upright, carrying your own weight, and that posture alone is enough to unsettle people. Some test you. They push gently at first, using familiar tactics, guilt, nostalgia, reminders of who you used to be. When that fails, the pressure increases. They accuse you of being selfish, of thinking you're better than everyone else, of losing your values. This is the cost of no longer being easy to exploit. When access is removed, entitlement reveals itself as anger. What surprises you is how little this shakes you now. Not because you are numb, but because you finally understand the pattern. You see how quickly affection turns conditional when compliance disappears. And instead of scrambling to repair it, you let the truth stand. If your worth only exists when you are convenient, then it was never real. This is the moment the internal shift completes. You stop measuring yourself by how well you are received. You stop interpreting resistance as failure. You begin to understand that being disliked is not always a signal of wrongdoing. Sometimes it is simply the echo of boundaries colliding with expectations. And that collision, uncomfortable as it is necessary. You are not cruel. You are precise. You choose your words carefully or not at all. You conserve your energy. You invest where there is reciprocity, not obligation. And slowly the noise fades. The need to be seen as good loosens its grip. In its place is something sturdier, self-respect. Not loud, not performative, just present. By now the label has formed fully in the background. Villain, not because you harm, but because you no longer allow harm. Not because you dominate, but because you cannot be dominated the way you once were. You don't wear the title. Others assign it when they lose their leverage. And that is when the final realization settles in, heavy and undeniable. The rules were never fair. They rewarded those who took and punished those who endured. Playing nice was never protection, it was permission. Once you see that, there is no return to innocence, only forward into something quieter, sharper, and far more dangerous than anger. The quiet that follows this understanding is not empty. It is dense, weighted. It presses in around you not with fear, but with awareness. You start to see the world differently, as if a filter has been removed. Interactions feel slower now, more deliberate. You notice who speaks only when they want something, who listens only to reply, who disappears the moment you are no longer useful. These patterns were always there. You simply didn't have the distance to see them clearly. Distance changes everything. You no longer rush to fill silence, and in that pause, people reveal their intentions without realizing it. Some grow uneasy, fumbling for control. Others withdraw entirely, offended not by anything you said, but by what you refused to give. And then there are a few who remain steady, respectful, unchanged. You remember them because consistency, you learn, is rare. There is power in this observation, but it is a lonely power, because once you see clearly, you cannot pretend you don't. You cannot laugh at jokes that diminish you. You cannot agree just to keep the peace. You cannot unlearn the truth that many relationships were sustained not by mutual care, but by your tolerance. This is where the world starts to feel colder, not because you have become heartless, but because illusion once provided warmth. Belief softened edges, hope blurred intentions. Without it, things appear as they are, sharper, cleaner, more honest. And honesty, stripped of comfort, feels brutal at first. You begin to understand why so many people choose to stay unaware. Why they cling to narratives of fairness and goodwill even when experience contradicts them. Awareness demands responsibility. It demands choice. And choice demands consequence. Once you know, you must decide how much you are willing to tolerate going forward. You decide quietly. You stop chasing closure from people who benefit from your confusion. You stop explaining yourself to those committed to misunderstanding you. You stop offering access to anyone who treats it as entitlement. These decisions don't make you louder, they make you firmer. And firmness, unlike anger, does not burn out. Others feel it. They adjust their tone around you. Some become cautious, others become distant. A few attempt to provoke a reaction, hoping to pull you back into the old dynamic where you were predictable, reactive, manageable. But you don't take the bait, not because you are afraid, but because you no longer need to prove anything. This restraint is misunderstood. They think you are plotting. They think you are holding grudges. They think your silence is hostility. The truth is simpler and more unsettling. You are at peace with letting people think whatever they need to think. Their perception no longer defines your posture. And that independence, more than any confrontation, shifts the balance of power. You feel it internally first. A steadiness. A reduction of inner noise. Decisions become cleaner when they are not filtered through the need for approval. You trust yourself more because you are no longer constantly betraying yourself for acceptance. This trust is quiet, but it is unshakable. Still, there is a cost. You miss the ease of being liked effortlessly. You miss the simplicity of believing everyone meant well. You miss the version of yourself that could walk into any room and feel welcome. But you also remember what that welcome required: the self-erasure, the constant adjustment, the unspoken rule that your comfort was negotiable. And you realize you do not miss that at all. The villain, you now understand, is not a mask you put on. It is the name given to you when you stop wearing the mask everyone preferred, when you step out of the role assigned to you without asking permission, when you choose alignment over approval. This is not transformation through force. It is transformation through clarity. And as this chapter of your life closes, one final truth emerges, unsettling in its simplicity. Once you stop needing to be seen as good, you become capable of something far more powerful. You become untouchable. The world will respond to this change, not immediately, not openly, but inevitably. And when it does, you will see just how threatening your self-control really is. When silence becomes a threat, silence used to scare you. Not the absence of sound, but the absence of reassurance. The fear that if you didn't explain yourself, didn't soften the moment, didn't clarify your intentions, something would be lost. A connection, an image, control over how you were perceived. So you spoke, you filled gaps, you defended truths that never needed defending. Now silence feels different. It is no longer empty space. It is weight. When you stop reacting, the world leans in. People are accustomed to feedback, to resistance, to emotion they can read and manipulate. Your quiet interrupts their rhythm. It removes their leverage. They can no longer predict you, and unpredictability makes people nervous, especially those who relied on your transparency to stay comfortable. You notice it in conversations first. How others keep talking, adding details you didn't ask for. How they circle a point, hoping you'll nod, interrupt, reassure them, but you don't. You listen, calm, still, and in that stillness the balance shifts. They begin revealing things they never intended to say, justifying themselves, explaining motives, exposing insecurities. Silence, you learn, is not passive, it is a mirror. When you used to speak quickly, you were managing outcomes, managing feelings, managing perception. You thought this was maturity, but it was labor. Emotional labor you performed so others wouldn't have to face discomfort. Now that you've stopped, that discomfort has nowhere to go but back to them. Some people interpret this as distance, others as punishment. A few see it as arrogance. They ask what's wrong. They assume something must be wrong because your quiet no longer serves them, but nothing is wrong. You are simply no longer negotiating your presence. This is where silence becomes threatening, not because you are plotting, but because you are unmovable. You no longer rush to clarify misunderstandings that benefit others more than you. You no longer chase harmony at the expense of truth. If someone misinterprets you now, you let it stand, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. That restraint rewrites the dynamic. People accustomed to control feel it slipping. They try old tactics first. Casual comments meant to provoke a reaction, subtle digs disguised as humor, questions that are not questions but hooks. You see them clearly now, and you decline to bite. Each non-reaction tightens something in the air. You realize then that silence is not absence, it is positioning. By saying less, you are seen more clearly. By reacting less, you gain leverage, not because you seek power, but because power naturally settles where there is control. Emotional control, temporal control, control over access to you. This control does not announce itself, it simply exists, and that existence forces others to adapt. Some grow respectful, they measure their words. They think before crossing lines they once stepped over casually. Others grow resentful. They preferred you expressive, reactive, explainable. They preferred knowing where they stood. Your silence denies them certainty, and uncertainty exposes intention. You start to understand something unsettling. People were never listening to your words as much as they were reading your reactions. Now that those reactions are gone, they are left guessing. And guessing makes people reveal who they really are. Silence sharpens your perception. You hear what is not said. You notice patterns instead of promises. You feel shifts in energy that words once drowned out. This awareness is quiet but relentless. It shows you which connections are built on respect and which were built on access. And for the first time, you don't rush to fix that realization. You let silence do its work, because silence, when chosen, is not weakness. It is a line drawn without ink, a boundary enforced without violence, and those who relied on noise to cross it feel exposed. They begin to test the silence the way someone tests thin ice, carefully at first. A message sent and left unanswered longer than usual. A comment dropped into the air, waiting for a response that never comes. They are listening now, but not for words. They are listening for cracks, for proof that the old version of you is still reachable if they apply enough pressure. You don't give it to them. What they don't understand is that this quiet is not something you are doing to them. It is something you have stepped into for yourself. Silence is no longer avoidance. It is selection. You are choosing where your energy goes and, more importantly, where it does not. Every moment you don't react is a moment reclaimed from a cycle that once drained you. This unsettles people who are used to emotional immediacy, those who thrive on quick responses, on visible impact, on the reassurance that they can still move you. Your stillness denies them feedback, and without feedback, control slips. You see how often noise was used to blur accountability, How arguments escalated not to resolve truth but to exhaust it. How emotions were weaponized to rush decisions, force forgiveness, bypass boundaries. Silence removes that advantage. It slows everything down, and in that slower pace, intention becomes visible. Some people mistake your calm for indifference. They think you no longer care. The truth is more precise. You care too much to continue caring recklessly. You have learned the cost of unfiltered access. You have learned that not every emotion deserves expression, and not every situation deserves your voice. This restraint is a discipline. It takes effort to remain quiet when you know exactly what you could say, when you could dismantle an argument in seconds, when you could expose manipulation with a single sentence, but you don't. Because winning the moment is no longer your goal. Protecting your position is, and position once established is powerful. You notice how people adjust around you now, how conversations become shorter, more deliberate, how jokes aimed at you disappear, how disrespect hesitates before landing. Silence has recalibrated the room, not through dominance but through unpredictability. People no longer know which version of you they'll get, and so they tread carefully. This is not fear, it is awareness. You are not trying to intimidate anyone, but you are no longer advertising your thoughts, your plans, your vulnerabilities. Privacy has become your armor. The less they know, the less they can use. The quieter you become, the clearer your priorities grow. And with that clarity comes something unexpected, peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everyone else behaving well, but a grounded peace that exists regardless of how others act. Because your stability is no longer outsourced. It is internal, self-regulated, untouchable by provocation. This is where silence stops being a tactic and becomes a state of being. You don't rehearse conversations in your head anymore. You don't feel the urge to correct every misunderstanding. You let people believe what they want. Those who matter will see you clearly over time. Those who don't were never meant to have access anyway. The irony is sharp. The less you try to control perception, the more control you actually gain. People start projecting onto your quiet. They assume intention where there is none, strategy where there is only self-respect. They call it coldness because warmth once came easily from you, and its absence feels like punishment. But you are not punishing anyone. You are simply no longer compensating for others' discomfort. Silence has taught you something words never could. It has shown you who panics when they lose influence, who becomes hostile when they lose access, who respects boundaries without needing them explained. These distinctions are priceless. They sort your world for you without confrontation, without drama. And slowly you begin to understand why silence has always frightened people more than anger. Anger burns fast. It reveals itself. It can be waited out, argued with, manipulated. Silence offers no such openings. It does not negotiate. It does not justify. It simply remains. In that remaining, something else happens. Time starts working in your favor. You are no longer reacting in real time. You observe, you delay, you choose your moments. And those who once rushed you now find themselves waiting, uncertain, off balance. The roles have reversed without a single word exchanged. This is the quiet power of non-reaction, and as it settles into your identity, you feel the final shift of this chapter taking hold. A realization that lands not as excitement, but as certainty. Silence is no longer something you use. It is who you are becoming. And those who relied on your voice to control the narrative are beginning to understand what they've lost. They begin to talk about you when you are not there, not because you did something, but because you didn't. Silence creates a vacuum, and people rush to fill it with stories. They guess at your motives. They assign meanings to your absence. They rewrite your calm into arrogance, your restraint into hostility. This is not an accident. When they cannot read you, they must reframe you in a way that makes sense to them, a way that restores their comfort. You let them. This is the part no one prepares you for. The moment when doing nothing feels like doing damage. When you hear fragments of what's being said. When you realize your quiet has unsettled the room enough that others feel compelled to explain you on your behalf. Old versions of you are dragged out, reshaped, repurposed. You could step in. You could correct the narrative. You could remind them of your intentions. You choose not to, because you understand now that clarity offered too quickly is another form of surrender. You are not responsible for managing other people's interpretations. You were never meant to be. That responsibility was placed on you because you accepted it once. You don't accept it anymore. And this refusal changes how power moves around you. Those who relied on your reactions to gauge their standing feel exposed. They begin to overcompensate, to speak louder, to act bolder, to provoke openly what they can no longer pull quietly. You see it happening in real time, the escalation. The impatience, the cracks in their composure. Silence has removed their mirror. Without your feedback, they don't know who they are in the interaction, and that uncertainty terrifies people who build their identity on influence. They try to force you back into motion. They mistake stillness for stagnation, not realizing it is momentum redirected inward. You remain unmoved. This is when the atmosphere truly shifts, not dramatic, not explosive, but undeniable. You feel it in the way rooms go quieter when you enter, in the way conversations pause for a fraction longer than before, in the way your presence alone now carries weight it never did when you were constantly accommodating. You haven't raised your voice. You haven't made demands. You haven't issued ultimatums. You simply stopped leaking energy. And the cost of that realization hits others harder than it hits you. Some distance themselves, unable to operate without emotional access. Some become openly critical, needing to frame you as the problem so they don't have to examine their loss of control. And some quietly adjust. They respect the boundary because they recognize strength when they see it. You take note of all of it, because silence doesn't make you blind. It makes you observant. You are learning the difference between presence and availability, between respect and familiarity, between being known and being exposed. These distinctions were impossible to make when you were constantly explaining yourself. Now they define your world. The most unsettling change, though, is internal. You are no longer afraid of being misunderstood. That fear once governed your behavior, shaped your tone, filtered your truth. Now it feels distant, almost irrelevant. You understand that misunderstanding is not always a failure of communication. Sometimes it is a refusal to accept boundaries. And no amount of explanation can fix that. This understanding hardens into something permanent. You no longer rush to defend your character. You let time do that work. You let consistency speak. You let absence teach lessons words never could. This patience is not passive. It is strategic. And strategy, once learned, does not disappear. As Chapter 2 draws to a close, one final truth settles in, heavy and unavoidable. Your silence has changed the rules of engagement. People can no longer reach you the way they used to. They can no longer move you the way they once did. And for the first time, the power in the room does not belong to the loudest voice. It belongs to the one who can wait. And in the stillness that follows, something else begins to form, not anger, not revenge, but a deeper question that will define what comes next. If silence already makes you this threatening, what happens when you stop caring whether they fear you at all? The moral lie they taught you a story early on. So early it didn't feel like a lesson, just the way the world worked. Be good and good things will come. Be patient and you will be rewarded. Be forgiving and you will be at peace. It sounded simple, clean, moral, and for a long time you lived by it without question. You learned to swallow irritation because patience was praised. You learned to overlook disrespect because forgiveness was holy. You learned to keep giving even when it hurt because generosity was virtue. And every time you hesitated, that old voice returned, calm and convincing, telling you this was what strong people did. This was what good people endured. What they didn't tell you was who benefits from this arrangement. No one warns you that morality, when simplified, becomes a leash. That words like kindness and humility can be reshaped into tools, not to elevate you, but to contain you. You were never taught to ask whether the system rewarding your goodness was fair, only whether your behavior was acceptable. And so you complied. You complied even when your boundaries were crossed because reacting felt wrong. You complied when your time was taken without permission because saying no felt selfish. You complied when your silence was mistaken for consent because correcting it felt confrontational. Each compromise felt small. Each sacrifice felt temporary. Together, they built a cage. The moral lie was never that goodness is wrong. It was that goodness must be endless, unconditional, and quiet. That real virtue asks nothing in return. That strength is proven through endurance, not protection, and anyone who steps outside this narrative is suspect. This is where the villain label takes shape, not when you hurt someone, not when you dominate, but when you stop absorbing damage politely. The first time you enforce a boundary without apology, the tone shifts. People don't ask what changed. They ask who you think you are. They invoke your past behavior as evidence against you, as if your previous compliance was a contract you signed for life. They remind you of your values, but only the ones that benefited them. This is not morality. It is conditioning. You begin to see how often moral language is used to shame strength. How be the bigger person usually means be the quieter one. How let it go often translates to accept what should never have happened. How forgiveness is demanded immediately, but accountability is postponed indefinitely. And something inside you resists, not loudly, not angrily, but firmly. You start questioning ideas you once accepted without hesitation. Why is patience only praised when it serves others? Why is selfishness condemned only when it looks like self-preservation? Why is assertiveness admired in some and punished in others? These questions don't make you bitter, they make you awake. Awareness is dangerous to systems built on obedience. You notice how quickly people reach for moral superiority when their access to you is threatened. How easily they frame themselves as victims the moment you stop accommodating them. The language is familiar now. You've heard it before, even used it on yourself. But it no longer lands the same, because you see the imbalance. Goodness, you realize, was never meant to mean vulnerability without limits. It was never meant to erase discernment. Yet somewhere along the way, you were taught that protecting yourself was a moral failure, that drawing lines was unkind, that choosing yourself was betrayal. This lie kept you manageable, and when you step out of it, the reaction is immediate. Confusion, resistance, judgment. You are no longer seen as principled. You are seen as changed, hardened, corrupted, as if morality was something you lost rather than something you refined. But you know the truth now. You didn't abandon goodness. You reclaimed it. You stripped it of the expectation that it must cost you everything. You separated compassion from compliance. You learned that morality without boundaries is not virtue. It is vulnerability exploited by those who refuse to be accountable. This realization doesn't make you cruel. It makes you selective. And selection is power. As this chapter unfolds, you feel the weight of an uncomfortable truth pressing closer. If the moral rules you lived by only applied to you, then they were never rules at all. They were restraints, and now that you see them clearly, the question is no longer whether you will break them. It is what happens when you do. The moment you stop apologizing for your strength, the world reacts as if you committed a sin, not an obvious one, not something that can be named cleanly, but a quiet violation of expectation. You were supposed to carry more than your share without complaint. You were supposed to forgive faster than others reflected. You were supposed to remain accessible even when it cost you sleep, dignity, peace. By refusing, you disrupt a moral economy that depended on your self-denial. They begin to speak in familiar tones, disappointment disguised as concern, advice that sounds generous but carries an edge. They tell you you're becoming rigid, that life isn't meant to be so guarded, that you should be careful not to push people away. What they really mean is that you are no longer easy to reach, and that distance makes them uncomfortable. This is where guilt tries to re-enter. It asks whether you've gone too far, whether you've misunderstood kindness, whether you've mistaken self-protection for ego. These questions feel reasonable because they echo everything you were taught. But now, instead of reacting, you examine them. And in that examination, they fall apart. You look at the evidence of your own life. At how often your patience was taken as permission, how often your forgiveness prevented accountability, how often your silence allowed patterns to continue unchecked. You realize that morality, as it was practiced around you, rarely asked anything of those who caused harm. It asked everything of those willing to endure it. That is not balance. That is not justice. So you stop measuring your actions by how they make others feel in the moment. You start measuring them by whether they are aligned with truth, with fairness, with long-term integrity. This shift is subtle but seismic. It changes how you move through the world. You no longer rush to de-escalate at your own expense. You no longer feel responsible for restoring harmony when you didn't disrupt it. You let discomfort exist without rushing to anesthetize it with your compliance. And in doing so, you expose something many people rely on, your fear of being seen as bad. Once that fear dissolves, so does their leverage. They cannot shame you into silence anymore. They cannot invoke morality to override your boundaries. The old words still come, but they land on different ground now. You see the intention behind them. You hear what is being asked of you, and you decline calmly. This calm refusal is what earns you the label. Villain, not because you are unjust, but because you are no longer useful in the same way. Because you refuse to absorb blame that isn't yours. Because you don't collapse under moral pressure designed to keep you small. You have stepped outside the script, and there is no role prepared for you beyond antagonist. The irony is painful and precise. The moment you begin acting with true integrity, you are accused of losing it. But integrity, you realize, is not about being liked. It is about being aligned. It is about acting from principle even when it costs you approval. And that cost, once paid, frees you. You start to notice how much energy you once spent trying to appear virtuous instead of being honest. How often you chose politeness over clarity. How many conversations were shaped not by truth but by fear of fallout. Releasing that fear feels like shedding a heavy coat you didn't know you were wearing. You breathe differently now. Your decisions take longer, but they land firmer. You are not impulsive, but you are decisive. You are no longer swayed by emotional pressure or moral theatrics. You recognize when values are being invoked sincerely and when they are being used as tools of control. This discernment sharpens you. It makes you quieter, not because you have less to say, but because you no longer waste words where they will be twisted. You reserve your voice for moments that matter. And when you speak, it carries weight because it is no longer diluted by constant concession. As deepens, another truth becomes unavoidable. Morality that demands your self-erasure is not morality at all. It is obedience wrapped in virtue language, and you were never meant to live that small. You feel the final shift of this chapter locking into place, steady and irreversible. You are no longer afraid of being the villain in someone else's story, because you finally understand whose story you are living. You begin to recognize how deeply that moral lie shaped your instincts, how quickly you once flinched at the thought of being seen as wrong, how reflexively you softened your edges before anyone even asked. You were trained to self-correct before others had to anticipate discomfort and erase it preemptively. This wasn't empathy, it was conditioning, and conditioning works best when it feels virtuous. You see it now in the way people react when you don't bend. The surprise comes first. Then the moral framing. They speak of values, of character, of who you used to be. They don't ask what led you here. They don't ask what changed inside you. They assume deviation must mean corruption. That growth must mean decay. It's easier that way. If you are wrong, they don't have to question the rules. If you are selfish, they don't have to examine their expectations. If you are the villain, they get to remain righteous. This realization is sobering, not because it makes you cynical, but because it makes you precise. You stop arguing with narratives designed to protect others from accountability. You realize that morality, when honest, is not fragile. It does not shatter under questioning. It does not require your silence to survive. True goodness does not ask you to betray yourself to prove it exists. Only systems of control do that. This understanding settles into your body like muscle memory. You no longer tense when someone disapproves. You no longer rush to justify your choices. Disapproval used to feel like danger. Now it feels like information, data, a signal of misalignment, not a verdict. And with that shift, fear loosens its grip. You notice how often people conflate discomfort with harm, how quickly they claim injury when confronted with boundaries, how easily they weaponize moral language to avoid sitting with consequences. Once you see this pattern, it becomes impossible to unsee. You stop confusing loud emotion with truth. You stop mistaking accusation for accuracy. You become harder to move, not rigid but grounded, anchored in something deeper than approval. Your values no longer live in other people's reactions. They live in your actions, consistent and measured. You don't announce them, you demonstrate them, and you don't explain them to those committed to misunderstanding you. This is where your posture changes completely. You stand differently in conversations. You listen without leaning forward. You speak without overqualifying. You allow silence after statements instead of rushing to fill it. These are small shifts, almost invisible, but they change the entire dynamic. You are no longer asking permission to exist as you are. Some people respect this immediately. Others resent it quietly. A few will never forgive you for it. That used to terrify you. Now it simply clarifies your landscape. You understand that being morally upright does not mean being universally palatable. That fairness does not require self-sacrifice without limit. That kindness loses its meaning when it is demanded instead of chosen. These truths don't harden you. They stabilize you. The villain narrative still circulates, of course. It always will. Anyone who steps outside expectation invites interpretation. But now that narrative no longer reaches inside you. It stays external where it belongs. You don't fight it. You don't feed it. You let it burn itself out on the reality of your consistency, and slowly something remarkable happens. The people who remain in your life begin to change how they treat you. They become clearer, more direct, more respectful. Not because you asked them to, but because ambiguity no longer works. Your presence demands honesty, not through force, but through refusal to play games. As comes to a close, the final layer of the moral lie dissolves completely. You see now that goodness was never about being harmless. It was about being just. And justice, real justice, requires boundaries. It requires the courage to be misunderstood. It requires the willingness to be cast as the villain in stories that were never fair to begin with. You are no longer trying to be seen as good. You are committed to being true, and that commitment changes what comes next.